All right, everybody. This is CS50 on Twitch. My name is Colton Ogden, and I'm joined today by
Nick Wong. Hello, I'm back.
He's been here several times. Last time we talked about Linux commands.
Yes,
which was awesome.
We tried to talk about Linux commands.
Which is because if we go to this screen, we have the screensaver that you showed us how you set up, which is awesome. Yeah. The very first stream that you talked with us about was what was the first?
Machine learning.
Machine learning, and now when you did showcase. This
also showed this off. I really like this one. I think it's super cool. Whoever made CMatrix should really this is an advertisement for your program. You did a great job.
It really is. What are you going to talk about today on the stream?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, in case you have not heard of everyone's favorite kind of infrastructural support. And we're going to build some web servers on it. That's a very vague term. All sorts of things are web servers, like mail servers and stuff like that. But we're going to talk about kind of everyone's kind of mental conception of it'll deliver a web page to us in some shape or form.
So Amazon Web Services being kind of like our ability to have a server in the cloud as opposed to just somewhere in a building somewhere.
Yeah, I don't have to lug the giant rack server around. Yeah. Amazon does that for me.
Amazon does all the hard work for us.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and look at all the chat here. We have quite a bit of people. So we did some earlier testing. So Bavik Knight, ISO TV. We have a lot of regulars here. So Bella Cures. ISO TV was, I believe, followed us last time, last stream, which was yesterday. I apologize if it was before that. Yesterday, I think I had seen the follow notification. He's saying, yeah, yesterday was. He or she is saying, yeah, yesterday was awesome. They're talking about a pizza party. They were offered to have a pizza party yesterday. If I chose the right spaceship, they had a debate, which spaceship we should choose.
That's kind of cool.
All kinds of fun stuff. Asley's in the chat. Hello, Asley. Nuwanda3333. Yapka Chasen, who was a new person yesterday.
Cool.
M. Kloppenberg. Robert Springer. Hello, Robert Springer. Huh. Brian Rodriguez. Good to see you. And Greg does that. First timer, be gentle, please.
Wow.
I think today's going to be...
Yeah, it's going to be pretty non-technical.
Yeah, it's kind of like a nice beginning introduction to if you have a website you want to set up somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Much easier to do it now than it was probably 20 years ago, right?
I think it's a lot easier than the days of manual web pages and web directories kind of just being exposed willy-nilly and PHP.
Oh, yeah.
Although I guess we'll actually probably talk about PHP.
CS50 used to teach in PHP, and we convinced David to switch to Python.
Thank God.
That was a fine, shining moment, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that switch. I think when I took CS50, we had switched to Python by then. Thank God.
That was the first, I think it was 2016?
Yeah, that was the first year.
First year.
Dang.
Yeah. It was a good year.
Yeah. No more PHP. Actually, just to be clear, there's nothing inherently wrong with PHP. I just think it's a lot less elegant, a lot less clean than Python.
I just think it's a lot more terrible.
Yeah, I just don't like it.
I think it is fine. And to David's point, they do have pretty good docs.
Yep.
Pretty good documentation.
If you look at Laravel, it's a beautiful framework written in PHP. They do a great job. I just don't use it.
It made it super easy, I think, when it first came out for people to integrate their HTML with logic.
Right.
It was hard to do at that point.
I think impossible up until that point because JavaScript wasn't even really a thing.
Yeah.
Dang.
Got some other people. So Andre's in the chat. Hello, Andre. Thank you very much for joining. Please do the stream like we were a bunch of Jon Snows.
Oh, we know nothing.
Oh, got it. Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Man, when is that next season? Sorry, not to sidetrack, but we do that constantly. It's fine.
Yeah.
When's that next season of Game of Thrones coming out?
Let's find out.
Is that
Game
next?
Game of Thrones. I've seen the advertisements for it. Game of Thrones. Season 8. I think it's season 8, right?
Yeah.
8th and final season was announced in July 2016. But that's
not helpful, but
premiere April 2019.
Oh.
So April 2019, tune in for Game of Thrones.
Oh, we're getting there. The end of the school. Wait, that's perfect. Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people, I don't know if you guys just have faster Google than we do, or if you're just smarter. You always manage to, because I know this stream lags a little bit, right?
A little bit.
So, so the fact that y'all get that at around the same time as we do.
Oh, they must have. Maybe they knew already.
Yeah.
They're just fast, lightning fast. Asley Bavix, and as he says, I can't wait.
That's awesome. Yeah, me neither. Cool.
All right,
so then we're going to get started. As always, we don't have a whole lot prepped. We're just going to kind of literally sign in front of you. And by that, I'm not going to type everything. Sorry, this is, I'll go back.
Zoom in just a little bit, too. I think it's a little bit tiny.
Oh, we can, Oh, nice. Go Amazon for making that responsive design.
Oh, yeah.
So this is aws.amazon.com. It stands for Amazon Web Services, which is great.
Let me toss that in the chat as well. aws.amazon.com.
Make sure there's no hidden parts. Yep, there you go. And so we can log in there. If you're a student, then you actually get a bunch of free credits and all sorts of perks that I probably don't take full advantage of. If you're not, then there's all sorts of like free tier things associated with the Amazon accounts. So you can do all of what we're about to do totally for free. AWS is really cool in that it basically gives you access to, kind of as Colton said, just any sort of server resource really that you could possibly desire. Now, I think there are a bunch of articles, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there are a ton of articles online about how to mine Bitcoin with Amazon Web Services servers, and I would argue that they're almost all not worth it. It's cool as like an exercise, totally not worth your resources. You do have to pay above some certain like resource usage on Amazon or on AWS.
Really expensive.
It gets pretty expensive, yeah. And there's not. I don't think that anyone has formally studied this, but I would imagine just kind of by intuition, there is no service on Amazon that is powerful enough to make you more Bitcoin than you are losing for paying for the service. So just as an FYI, don't get scammed by that. We're going to be working with EC2 instances, and they are basically your own personal versions of instances that run servers. And when I say instance, I basically mean that there is some server physically located somewhere. And they actually have different regions. So like I'm in the Oregon region because it's closer to my hometown. They didn't have the North California region for a while, so I would have otherwise chosen that. But they have these physical kind of just data centers of just racks and racks of servers, and there's all sorts of resources there. And what this does is it kind of gives you a high-level interface over those resources. You can specifically request to have your own hardware. It is more expensive. That one's not free tier. But for the free tier stuff that we're going to be doing today, you actually kind of just get given a virtual machine within a server. So any one physical server is probably hosting hundreds of virtual machines on it. I think that would be a lot more cost effective than giving every single person their own server without request.
I can imagine millions of machines.
Yeah, and it would be awful. Probably or very difficult to maintain. Although Amazon has, for a company that makes what, 230 million, or 200 billion, I think, per year. Apple's the one at 230 billion, which is absurd. Cool. So we're going to go into, I have a couple running instances for just varying things I do on here, but we can also now see the interface for that is what's going on up here. You'll see the instance type. So most of these are micros. The only one that is not is the one that I run for an organization here, and we just happen to need the extra resources for what's going on there. Everything else, there's a bunch of resources here. There's all sorts of cool things that AWS lets you do. Like these status checks, I don't really use a whole lot, but you can set up all sorts of things for like if you have some sort of integration testing or some sort of the server's up or down, or certain services on the server are up or down, then that could notify you. There's these alarms that do very similar things. They basically implement the notification part of that. The key name is the key, like whatever, we'll talk about this in a second because you use SSH to access your server once you have created it. With very few caveats. And this is the name of the key file that was handed back to you when you tried to set it up. There's all sorts of monitoring you can do, and then there's some other data over here. The thing with AWS that can make it a little bit difficult for people beginning, and we will definitely talk about this and just kind of experience it when we go and set stuff up, is AWS sets things up very modularly and very extensively. It's actually a really good feature, not a bug. But it can be very buggy feeling when you are just getting started, and you're like, what's a security group? What's a user group? What are these access things? Why do I need all of this? And a lot of times, for a lot of simple use cases, you don't need all of those things. But for like kind of business and enterprise use cases, you really do. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of launch a new instance. And what that means for us is we're going to ask Amazon to allocate to us some sort of new server resource for us. We're going to spin up a micro instance, and sorry, because we're doing live, we will have the spinny ball of death basically a couple of times. And we're going to spin up some Linux instances. You'll see that they usually point out if they are free tier eligible, and that's what we're going to try and stick to because we don't really want to spend too much money. I'm a student, I don't make a whole lot of money, so we're basically just trying to keep everything as cheap as possible. You can even select the type of architecture over on the right-hand side. It's not super visible in the chat, but I'll move that like right there. It's over on the right-hand side. It's between Colton and myself.
It might be a little bit large at the moment.
And so basically, what you can do here is you can select architecture. We're going to leave it in 64-bit x86-64. And I'm going to pick an Ubuntu server. I happen to really like Ubuntu. I think it's super versatile and very clean. It's a really nice version of Linux. So I'm going to use that. And we can go ahead and click select. And then it brings up a bunch of options. We don't have to really deal with too many of these. Our server is not really going to have too much load unless you guys all hit it at once. Please don't, or like go for it. I don't know. We'll like get there when we do. That might crash it, but otherwise I don't really have to deal too much with this. You can scroll down. There are quite a few different kinds of server, and there's all sorts of options and parameters to them. They'll tell you if they have solid state drives, which are going to be a little bit. There's certain reasons you might use a solid state drive over an actual spinning hard drive. Hard drive space is a little bit cheaper. Solid state drive is a lot more expensive to use, but it has all sorts of benefits as far as like robustness and speed and things like that. And then you also have the number of, they say vCPUs. Depending on whether or not you ask Amazon to allocate an actual server, like physical hardware for you, that might be a real CPU. It kind of depends on how it's being allocated for you.
It's like an abstraction.
Yeah, it's an abstraction away from the actual hardware CPU so that they're promising what they actually are giving you rather than something a little bit more. This is the memory, so RAM. Something to keep in mind for people beginning with some sort of CS experience or career is memory does not mean storage. It is literally like the active memory of your computer. You can kind of think of like what you can keep in your head at any one time. It's RAM. So random access memory. Your actual storage, I don't remember what EBS stands for, but this basically just means that we're not getting any sort of fancy caveated storage. This will probably be some sort of hard disk space that's shared with a bunch of other people.
Oh, is it Elastic Beanstalk?
Yes, there we go. It's the other service that Amazon has, but this one is not particularly, like we're not getting anything special. It'll be the minimum storage that they can hand to us.
David was just talking to me about Elastic Beanstalk yesterday.
Nice.
And I don't know, still don't know too much in detail, but.
That's all right.
Brenda in the chat did say she's never seen Game of Thrones. Shout out to Brenda for joining us.
Wow, and for being brave enough to say you've never seen Game of Thrones.
I know, that's a brave thing to say. I am Caustic says, hello CS50, can I host a website on AWS?
Yes, you can totally host a website on AWS. In fact, that's what we're going to do. This is the hosting part of it. In fact, domain names and hosting are pretty much entirely separate, although a lot of domain name providers like GoDaddy or Domain.com actually allow you to purchase hosting on top of the domain name itself. But you can purchase just a domain name for like $3, depending on the domain. But you can purchase just the domain and have it do nothing. I happen to have a bunch of domains that do nothing.
So then when you do have that killer website.
Exactly, then I can just throw it behind that domain. And so then hosting is something that you could do on Heroku, you could do it here, you could do it on like Microsoft Azure, you could do it on, I think Google has hosting services that would also be really good. You could do it anywhere you'd like and then just kind of throw that hosting service behind the domain name.
Looks like Robert Springer said, did you say we can follow along for free?
Yes, yeah, you can totally follow along for free. All that we're going to do here is going to be entirely free, open access, open source. There is, even the kernel is open source if you wanted to be really like precise about that. So yeah, all it requires is that you have an account with AWS and that's it. If you're a student, you can do even more things that technically wouldn't have been free but are free for you.
Why do you choose AWS or Azure or Google Cloud? Is it more cheap,
Sure.
more functional? Just curious.
Sure. So that's actually a really cool question because up until a little while ago, that wasn't a question. Like people just chose AWS. There was no other real alternative. Azure.
Didn't they have pure market share for like 7 years?
Yeah, for a very long time. I think 7 years is about right, which is insane. I mean, that's a monopoly. And the United States actually has a couple of interesting court cases against tech companies where they don't know how to define a monopoly as it applies to tech companies. They struggle with it actually quite a bit. There's a famous case in 1995, I believe, or 98, one of the two, where the United States went against Microsoft for being a monopoly because they had packaged Internet Explorer into Windows. And that was a really cool court case because Microsoft lost. They lost that court case and paid a hefty fine for it. And then they made a commercial, I believe, or some sort of advertisement of Bill Gates dancing and basically not caring that they had lost this court case because I think that was one of the last major ones against a tech company. So yeah, sorry, it's kind of a tangent. I just think it's really cool. The reason I choose AWS over Azure and over Cloud is because I started using it actually first. It was just kind of the only service at the time. Google Cloud I do use for a couple of things, particularly if I'm using very Google-heavy resources. So if I'm using a bunch of Google APIs and I'm using Firebase and I'm using a bunch of other stuff that's all related to Google, then I'm going to switch over to Google because it's just a little bit more convenient. They have more tutorials that just naturally are going to integrate with their own services. AWS does a lot of the same thing, where if you are trying to set something up and you're using AWS's domain names and you're using, I think they call it Route 53, and so AWS's domain names, you're using Beanstalk, you're using EC2, you're using S3 buckets, then it's a little bit more convenient for me to just kind of follow the whole tutorial by using AWS. And so for this, I'm going to recommend AWS because I know they have all sorts of free tier stuff that can be easily scaled, and they're really good for like an enterprise solution. So if you happen to want to go to a what do you call it? Like some sort of commercial solution, then this is actually a really good service for that. It scales really well, scales at low cost. But Microsoft Azure is also a great service. I think it's a little bit less developed than Amazon Web Services. And then Google Cloud is quite well developed. They do all sorts of cool things. I just happen to use AWS for this. And looking in the chat at the bottom, I just happened to notice that Bill Gates was pissed off. I'm sure he was, but then they responded to it in a very kind of comical way. I think the response to the loss of that court case was pretty hilarious and very, I think, emblematic of how tech companies view the United States court system at the moment. Cool. So gotta run. Brian Rodriguez says, gotta run, have to catch the rest of the stream later. Love to know your thoughts on when it might be better to use this over something like Heroku. And actually, that is a great thought that will help us lead into the next thing that we're gonna do. So we'll talk about that right after we read through the rest of the comments.
Stay Peaceful 89. Hello, Colton. Hey, everyone. Hey, Stay Peaceful. Glad you're joining us. Is this AWS S3, says Twitch Hello World?
Right. So AWS has, that's one of the few things I think is super annoying about how like you try and figure things out, is their naming system is not the most conventional. Like it doesn't, like Elastic Beanstalk. I don't necessarily inherently intuitively know what that means. Yeah. And I don't necessarily know what EC2 means. It's the way that we host things. S3 is the way that you store stuff. It's a storage bucket system. We probably won't touch on that today, but if we do a live stream about like Heroku and hosting there, then we will certainly talk about it.
Makes sense.
Cool.
I'm Caustic. I'm used to Namecheap hosting. Please explain step by step how to host a website on AWS, as sure. I am Caustic.
And that is our video, so yeah, that will happen.
Frame of Ref. I believe they then moved a Microsoft campus to Canada right across the border.
Yes.
And then the Bill Gates was pissed off.
They did a bunch of stuff. That was
AWS requires a credit card if that's an issue, says Brenda.
Yeah. Good to know.
But do they charge a credit card? Or
I do not believe so. They just require it in case you go over your hosting limits,
sure, that makes sense.
Which is pretty hard to do. You'd have to be basically mining Bitcoin.
Which you might have a little bit of experience with.
Which, yeah, I might have done that.
Do you happen to know, since you use Google a little bit, if Google and Microsoft Azure also have free tier or a free tier for students?
Yes, so they certainly have all sorts of, I would say, above free tier things for students that are free to students. They actually, as pointed out in the chat, Google offers $300 in free credit to students. I believe Azure offers $150. Don't quote me on that. They do offer money for students. There's basically a whole student developer bundle, and you get all sorts of stuff for free. And if you're not a student, then they do also have free tier things. I know you can use Azure for free at being not a student, but I think that their access is a little limited. They do have a little bit less resources available than AWS does.
Okay.
Cool.
That was good. I think we're all caught up on the chat.
Awesome. And so, answering the question above as to why you would use this as opposed to something like Heroku, let's say that I want to control everything about the server environment itself. So I want to configure some sort of parameters. If you are maybe like leading a cybersecurity club and you need to be really sure about how everything is hosted independently, and I need to actually set up some sort of interface on top of like a Docker container, spin up and spin down, then I'm going to want to use AWS as opposed to Heroku, because Heroku is not going to let me do that. Excuse me. Heroku is really, really good for hosting sorts of websites, having them integrate with things through APIs and webhooks and stuff like that, but not necessarily all that great if you want to control everything about the environment that is kind of the server itself. Whereas AWS, you just get handed a server. Whatever you do with that is up to you. They have all sorts of policies and things on like, not hacking the government through their servers, but you can do all sorts of cool stuff on your own. So what we're doing here is we picked an entire server. We picked a general purpose T2 micro, and again, their naming system is it's out there, but it basically just means that we're going to be able to use it for free. It doesn't have a whole lot of resources. It has one CPU, one virtual CPU, and 1 gigabyte of memory, and it has, they say, low to moderate network performance. I would classify that as actually like pretty good network performance. Like for most purposes, that's actually really cool. And then we're going to go ahead and review and launch. And you'll notice there was a button I kind of ignored, which was like configure all sorts of details. I'm going to not configure any details so that we run into some problems that people run into all the time so that we can fix them in front of you guys instead of just pretending that we didn't have them. Cool. Because there are some problems that will arise by just kind of ignoring security groups and stuff like that. Now, you get asked to like create a pair. I'm going to create a new key pair so you can see what this might look like. We're going to call this AWS Twitch Okay, live coding or live typing is just the worst. Wow, was Twitch demo. You gotta love that autocorrect. And I'm going to download that key pair. And what this basically means, and what this is talking about, is SSH keys. Oh, right. So you can actually now see my private key. Doesn't really matter. I'm not going to keep this up for too long. And if you want to go and hit my device, that's fine. Technically, if you were to sit down, type this all out, you could actually have access to my server as well. However, it's not going to outlive the length of this stream. And I don't know if any of you wants to really type that quickly, knock yourselves out. It's not worth it. Do it yourself.
OCR.
Yeah, actually, you could. Don't give them ideas. That would actually probably work. So yeah, this is my private key, and which you should never show anyone, by the way. Don't ever do this. This is a terrible idea.
First thing to show, not to do.
Yeah, so don't do this. This is bad. And the reason for that is it gives you access to my AWS instance, if you would like. So yes, in the chat they point out, no need to type it out, use Google Lens. Great. I'm really glad that we all have so many suggestions on how to do that. Yeah, so actually I guess there's like a pathway to it. You could take a screenshot, throw it through Google Lens. It would tell you the patterns, and you could try it. Yeah, awesome. So if I see a bunch of you on my machine, I'm going to try my best to kick you all out.
That'd be entertaining, actually.
Yeah, it'd be kind of cool. Actually, yeah, that's a good challenge. We'll kind of keep that as a side path for what's going on here. So what I'm going to do is I have a directory in my home directory called SSH. It's a hidden directory, so it starts with a dot. And I'm going to just copy, I think it's under downloads. And I called it AWS Twitch demo. And I'm going to copy that to here. I'm going to move that to just .pem. You also have to chmod.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, Kaloy, thanks for following. And Robert Springer followed just as we started. So thank you very much for following as well. Sorry,
awesome. No, it's all good. And so I'm going to do what's called a change modification, or chmod.
You're also saying your terminal's kind of hard to see.
Oh, right. No, you are absolutely right on that. That should be much better.
Yeah, that is. Thank
Sweet. So what I have in here is a bunch of other PEMs and stuff, and I will do my very best not to cat any of them. God. And then I also have a subdirectory called keys, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to chmod this. 600 would work. I actually prefer 400. It doesn't really matter. It's slightly tougher restrictions. That makes it so that SSH doesn't freak out when I try to use that. And then what I can do is move that into my keys subdirectory. Whoops. And I just like to keep everything really organized. So then what I can do is I can SSH using that authentication file, AWS, or sorry, that's in keys. Keys/AWS Twitch. Wow, do I have multiple keys starting with AWS? Cool. And then the default user for an Ubuntu machine is Ubuntu. And, oh, that's the other direction. Now that I've done that, I can actually launch this instance. So none of you could have possibly gotten onto the instance because it didn't exist yet, which is good. I'm a fan. And so we will wait while that launches. The only thing that I had a problem with the AWS console, and they've been slowly fixing this as they, or not slowly, but they've been fixing it as they go, is it is a little slow and it feels a little clunky to use. So if there's any AWS reps watching this, I do kind of get annoyed by how kind of weirdly clunky it feels. It feels a little 2005. So we're going to go back into EC2. And it will hopefully be up. It's getting there. It's not named, but I'm going to call it AWS Twitch demo. I don't know why I did that in all caps, but it sounds cool and aggressive. So we're going to go with that. You'll get the spinning blue ball of, not death, but we'll say patience.
Relaxation.
And yeah, relaxation. I've never been in a position where that's relaxing. I'm always like, all right, let's go. Like I'm like running late to a class. You know, it's never fun. And I'll reload the page too because I'm not fully trusting in there. Yeah, see, I don't always trust the way they do that. If you're colorblind, these green. I don't actually know what other colors these turn. For me, they're all green, but I imagine that they change color. Like, is this one different than this one in color? The stop versus running.
Are you colorblind?
I am. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, it's TIL.
Yeah.
So this one right here, that's like an orange color,
okay.
And that one's green.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So another thing for AWS, if they want to add that to their development docket, not that it would matter, but you know, kind of for use cases and things, would be to allow colorblind people to be able to see what's going on there. So I pulled up the AWS Twitch demos kind of like stats and all sorts of things in specifics here by clicking it or just selecting it, and it has this public IP address. And so I copy that, and they actually have this cool little widget, copy to clipboard. That's what I do. And now I can SSH into that. I'm going to paste that into my terminal, which it did get cut off a little bit, but no worries. And when I run this, it'll tell me, hey, it has a fingerprint you don't know. And that says yes, so it's going to add it to our known hosts. And now I'm logged in, which is great. Now, none of you guys are logged in. I appreciate that. W, as a kind of throwback to last week, is the who command. It tests who's on the machine. It hasn't been up for very long, so that would make sense. If I cd into .ssh, I am actually able to do sudo su, so I can take full control over this computer, and I can remove authorized keys. And you guys would all be like, no, wait, because now you can't log back in, which is great. So the SSH key that you guys all saw is no longer useful. However, if I get logged out by some sort of network timeout or breaking a pipe or something, I'm actually screwed. I can't log myself back in, which means that I would have to spin up another instance. But I'm totally OK with that, because spinning up these instances or spinning them down, taking snapshots, all sorts of things, actually very easy, and Amazon makes that super convenient. So yes, just verifying that there's no one else logged in. That's just me. So cool. Now you guys are not able to log in. Nothing against you. I'm just, I guess, showing a little bit of security practice. You're part of the Cybersecurity Club. You got to be. Should really not get hacked live. That would really suck.
Although, I mean, that'd be a great test of skill, though.
Yes.
How can you?
That'd be very fun.
Effective can you deter?
It is something we do in our club, actually, and I guess we'll do a kind of play run of this coming up
in
one of our streams.
Kali, right? Is what it's called?
Yeah, Kali.
Okay.
Yeah. And we will kind of throw Colton kind of against myself, but I mean that's not super great. It's a little unfair. I've just seen it before. Colton's definitely capable of it.
An infant against a very strong grown man. I don't know about that, man.
It's not a super fair argument. Cool.
They were saying Nick can't see how awesome a screensaver is. Actually, how much of your screensaver can you see? Are you just red, green?
I'm deuteranopic, so red, green, blue, purple, and a couple other colors in there. According to my eye doctor, it's like 20% of colors. I don't really notice it in my daily life. I still think my screensaver is really cool. I just imagine you guys think it's even cooler because you can see even more colors than I can.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Somebody else also mentioned something up
I think someone said that they are also.
Yes, somebody did. Yeah, Fatma, by the way. Thanks, Fatma, for joining. For Sunlight. Same here, Nick.
Yeah, appreciate
Fatma
that.
Said. And Imran Med said, Colton, Nick, nice combo.
Oh, I agree.
I have to agree.
Yeah.
I think that's. Oh, can you lock the EC2 instance to only accept connections from your IP?
Great question. Love it. So Stush Batis asks, can you lock the EC2 instance to only accept connections from your IP? Yes, actually, that deals with security groups. So actually, that doesn't really matter now. You guys can look at that all you'd like. But yes, it is a really good question, and it's something that causes a lot of bugs when people go to set up their first website on an EC2 instance. Is they get these security groups. You can see it here and here. Launch Wizard 1 is the incredibly creative name for the first security group.
Stush Batis, by the way, thank you for following.
Oh, we appreciate that. And so it has all these inbound, outbound rules. And if you're not super familiar with like kind of ports and IPs and networking rules in general, then don't worry. We're going to kind of talk about this as if it was like at your house, except with like weird rules that don't exist in real life. You'll notice that the inbound rule, like if I was in my house, this basically means the only thing that I allow coming into me or coming in to talk to me is SSH through TCP or through port 22. So what this basically does is it says you can only SSH into me. Any sort of web request, like a port 80 or port 443, is not going to go through. I'm going to just drop it. And actually, AWS is going to drop it, kind of before it even gets to your computer, before it even gets to that server. So basically what I did, which is where I SSH'd in on my own, that was totally valid. However, any other sort of operation, if I tried to like telnet 80, not going to work. And then you notice that there's this source 0000/0, which means from any sort of range within just anybody, just kind of the blank. I would think of it as like the wildcard for IP addresses. Totally valid. All of them are totally OK. Now outbound, my guess or my intuition should be that anything out is OK. And that is true. That's totally fine. And actually, a lot of network administrators make the same mistake. They say that all outbound traffic should be totally valid. However, if you have a mail server, why should it ever be requesting port 80? Is a good question, and it's a question we ask in cybersecurity all the time. In fact, a lot of network administrators set up their servers. They have like an internal mail server. They have an internal data storage server. And those servers have the outbound rules set to just anything goes. And the reason that that's kind of dangerous is, let's say that I manage to get a shell that reaches out but does not really reach back in or do anything. Like, I don't have to attack directly. I just kind of get a shell somewhere onto your database server. If your database server allows connections back out through like port 443, then you might not notice, because that looks like normal traffic otherwise, that database server is actually opened up a shell and it's pinging back outward, reaching out to me. And I know that a lot of administrators use that sort of configuration, so this is a really dangerous setup as far as like an intuition. However, in our case, that works perfectly fine. I'm not downloading anything off of this server, which is good. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's something that we'll come back to. You might intuitively say, oh, well, I should edit these inbound rules so that I can allow for HTTP, and that would be a great suggestion. So we're going to kind of add that as a rule. And now we've allowed, sorry, the : is the wildcard for IPv6, just as an FYI. That allows HTTP traffic to also ping our server. Now, our server doesn't have anything set up to deal with that, so it's going to just kind of go, oops, and drop those. Or actually, I don't think the default is to drop. I think the default is you kind of like look around and see if anything is listening and then drop it. And we're actually going to also add HTTPS, which is just the secure version. It uses SSL to encrypt its packets. It should be on, there we go. That's another thing where like anytime you're looking in a list live, it disappears. The item you're looking for is gone. It's not there. But everyone else can see it. There's no way that they can't see it. Actually, it's the only thing they can see. So yeah, one of the perks of doing things live. I'm going to leave my outbound rules as is, but if I wanted to be really strict about it, then I might modify SSH, or I might make it just very specific. And a good network practice is to only do things as needed, because it basically helps you restrict what's going on to actual use cases that you're thinking of. Otherwise, you get these kind of unknown use cases or undefined behavior, give or take, kind of with an asterisk, that you might not have expected. And that's usually where things kind of cause problems. So just kind of the more you know. And then there's all these like tags and things, and you can do all sorts of stuff with these security groups. So cool. Now that we've kind of configured our security group, we know that it's going to be a web server, so this allows web servers to work totally fine. We can go back to our instances tab, and as that loads, we will then see what's going on in our instance. Now, we have access to our server. Out of paranoia, I constantly type W, just as an FYI. And we know that we basically just have a fresh Ubuntu installation. So, and sudo is actually not needed here because I am root. Generally, I would advise not doing things as root, but I'll exit out of root in a second, just because kind of keeping in mind which permissions you have and which ones you don't, that's a good kind of safeguard and mental check to keep. And people are always like, oh, but it's annoying. But yeah, it's like it's a good annoying. Like you should kind of sit there and be like, well, I'm really glad I'm annoyed about this today because it prevented you from chmodding an entire, like, well, the entire machine actually. That would suck.
That would be rough.
Yeah, I've done that before. I did that actually. I did that I think a year and a half ago. I chmod, I think did this. I think with the R.
Like -R, yeah, right.
Yeah, and and then I was wondering why nothing worked, like because a lot of Ubuntu stuff and a lot of Linux stuff is actually based on the whole permissions restrictions stuff. So don't do that. That command will screw things up. And it was because I had that same thought process. So then we're also going to install some stuff. I think UFW is installed by default, but we're going to just make sure. We're going to also install Git just in case we want to pull it. And then anything else that I really would like to have on here. I think that's it for now. We are going to install some other stuff later, but that's okay. So I pulled Git onto our Ubuntu server. You'll notice that this is fairly fast, and there's no real evidence for that. It's kind of like an empirical observation. On Harvard Wi-Fi, I'm about the same speed or a little slower, so I like this speed. I think it runs pretty well. And so then what I'm going to do is exit out of being root. And we are now back into being our Ubuntu user, which is good. And if you wanted to really verify, that, who am I also kind of works. So then we're going to cd into our home directory. We've got nothing there, which is great. So we are back into color. You'll notice the color prompt is disabled for root. And if you go into that comment right above in your bash RC script where it says like the focus should not be the terminal's pretty colors, it should be the commands you're running, who was written by someone who hated fun. They actually have a very good point there where root actually gets rid of all color so that you're kind of in like a more serious mindset, I think is the motivation. So cool. We are now here, and we can set up all sorts of kind of very basic servers. Now, I'm trying to keep in mind that y'all also know the IP of this server, which means you can all connect to it. So I'm trying not to accidentally expose any sort of major security flaws, at least not for very long. But a kind of very basic check that you can do to make sure that you're actually online is you can ping something. Although updating and pulling stuff also, oh, whoops, wrong command, also guaranteed that we were online. But just in case, we now know we are connected to some portion of the internet, which is really cool. I guess, I don't know. If that makes you really happy, good. If it doesn't, that's OK. So we're keeping all of our stuff set up here. I keep wanting to go, what questions might we have? Like, I'm in like lecture mode at the moment. Like, what questions might we have about what's going on here? So that's a very basic setup of just the server that's going on in AWS. So the next thing that that was the thing I needed, Python. So I knew I was missing something. We're going to install Python 3. And that's going to pull Python 3 for us. We're also going to install Python 3's pip. I should have run that in the same command. That's OK. And what we're going to do is Python 3 has this really cool simple HTTP. Oh, there it is. Yeah, simple HTTP server. And that is, I love going on Stack Overflow. Simple HTTP server is something that is really, really convenient for just checking and doing all sorts of like very basic things with Python and for web servers. So we're going to just also grab Python 3's pip. And that's all we really need. Bavik Knight in the chat pointed out that we also would like setup tools. Totally valid. I believe pip pulls setup tools. It might not. It might end up grabbing them as a result of being run the first time if you don't have them already. If not, then totally valid. You can grab setup tools as well.
We do have a few other comments too, if you want to read some of those. And also thanks to Imran Ahmed for following us. Appreciate it. He says, Colton, a few days ago I sent you a mail about outreach inquiry. Would you please check that mail up? Did you send it to outreach@cs50.harvard.edu? Because I don't get those emails directly. So if you want to specify that in the chat. GDE1984, thank you very much for following. President of Mars, you should create a CS decathlon, coding attack a machine, 50 push-ups, etc.
That'd be kind of awesome. I'd be much more in shape, like much more buff, you know?
And then I guess some of the people in the chat, Jacob Chausten and President Mars, are sending each other postcards.
That's awesome.
Twitch Hello World has a question for you.
Yes.
Have any thoughts about the news stories today? I think it's about malware and open source libraries such as Node.js and earlier PyPy. Haven't used open source libraries though. Thought of using those in those streams. How does one protect against this?
Right. So there was I was listening to a cybersecurity guy from Rapid7 give a speech at a cyber defense competition that I went to a year ago, something like that. And he had a really good example of why you should be really scared of using open source software, which was directly related to your question. Basically being that people, let's take Node.js, for example. Pretty large system. It's at least a couple hundred megabytes, and I think, give or take. It's on the order of megabytes, and there's a lot of data in there. There's a lot of people who have contributed to it, and it's, we'd say, logistically impossible to manually check every single thing. And even if you could, let's say it's not logistically impossible, that you could actually check every single line of code that comes into that repository. It's very difficult for you as a single person or even as a group of people to predict all possible behaviors of that code. In fact, it's uncomputable. You cannot compute the behavior of code. Now, that is given with like the kind of generalist principle, right? Like in general, that's not true. That is true. That is mathematically true. But if I like do a certain piece of code, you could argue that it will do some things with reasonable high probability. Like I could argue that like typing out ls is going to do something that I can predict with almost 100% certainty. However, given something like Node.js, you couldn't necessarily look through its entire repository and know every single line of codes or every single functions is probably an easier way to look at this behavior and all possible behaviors. So what ends up happening there is you don't necessarily have any one surefire protection against someone including malicious code. Upon running this certain combination of commands, open up a shell to the world. That'd be really bad. Let's say that you are some major news network and you host something through Node.js, and you happen to run that combination of commands just by virtue of running many, many commands all at once. And you've now opened up a web shell to the world, and the web shell is such that it's persistent, and it continues coming back even if you never type those commands again. Well, that's a huge problem, because then your attacker only has to wait until you run them, and then you run them, sees the web shell's open, connects to you, and then takes over, steals information. If they're smart, then they hide themselves really, really well, and they never get detected, and they're constantly siphoning information. And maybe they're the Wall Street Journal or something. So like that would be really, really, it would be awful. And there's not necessarily a surefire protection against that, actually. There are a lot of really good iterative coding practices that can help. There's a difference between dealing with bugs versus dealing with malicious inclusions. And that is another kind of subtle problem, is how do you detect which one's which? Right, like let's say I submit a update to your code repository, a pull request, if you will, and you include it in your code repository, and you say, yep, looks good, and then you discover a couple of days later that it opens you up to a certain security vulnerability. Was that intentional, or did I just happen to overlook it, and you did too, right? I mean, that's kind of the argument would basically be, well, you reviewed my code, you thought it was good too, so we're at equal blame here. And I think that a lot of people will generally give you the benefit of the doubt. Now, if your username is HackerMan2017, I might not give you benefit of the doubt, but it is something to really.
Nick Wong username.
Yeah, I've totally never used that. I swear. So there's all sorts of ways to talk about this and deal with it. Right. We're really on a personal experience vein today, and so it is a great question, and there's not a super satisfying answer to it. It's actually one of the reasons that cybersecurity professionals are so needed. There's not a whole lot that I can really tell you on you're safe, don't worry, use open source software. That is one of the problems. That is one of the concerns. Now, a lot of very, very smart people are working on open source software and are monitoring it and trying to prevent this. And you have the thought is there are way more good people than there are malicious people on the development teams and uses of open source software. So if I'm someone who's using the Linux kernel, for example, which is open source, then there are enough of us that want it to work well and secure that if we discover someone is not doing that, we will try to fix it. We as a community, we will try and help. Excuse me. So there are some kind of protections, and good coding practices definitely help. Simpler code is generally harder to create this sort of unexpected behavior. If you can pinpoint out all of its possible use cases, technically you could secure that. But something that I heard from that cybersecurity professional was nothing is really secure unless you have built it yourself and thoroughly checked every possible use case. And that would make for a pretty boring computer. Your computer probably wouldn't be able to do much. So we don't actually have a computer or machine. The government might, but I would doubt it. That's something that is purely built, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, because even the compiler, you can't trust the compiler necessarily.
Compiler can do all sorts of nasty things. You could build a compiler that just appends a shell to the end of every code. I always rely on the shell because it's one of my favorite, very simple attacks. But could just append something that tags every piece of code, right? Every piece of code that comes out of a compiler. Actually, they do have compiler signatures, so that's literally what it does. If that was malicious, then that would be awful. So yeah, there's all sorts of nasty things you can do. Even the kernel could be malicious. So kernel, compiler, these are all low-level things, and most people wouldn't be able to really detect that. I wouldn't be able to detect that. Yeah.
Mosman820, thank you very much for following. Imran says, include you in the CC Ogden. All right, I'll take a look at that, Imran. I don't recall offhand, but I'll definitely check that out. Ignorance isn't a defense in the court of law, LOL, GDE 1984.
That is a great point. And I think it's something that a lot of the older sorry, not to kind of tangentially go on this, but I do love cybersecurity, and we are talking about building web servers. Ignorance not being a defense in a court of law, at least not in America, that is a really good point. And it's a kind of assumption that a lot of our current lawmakers and a lot of our current politicians rely on, actually. The problem is that if you're losing billions of dollars, it doesn't really matter if they're playing ignorance or not. You're losing billions of dollars. Yeah. And so a lot of people and a lot of hackers are aware of that fact, which is it takes a lot of precedence over the whether or not I can defend myself 6 months from now in a court of law. If I have taken down your company, well, okay. There's nothing you can do to me that is so bad that I will not get the satisfaction of tearing down, something awful. And so I think that those kinds of people very clearly do not understand just kind of the sake of society. I would count myself as a white hat hacker who's trying to educate people on why we should be very aware of these sorts of problems. But it is a good point that the bad guys in this case have a really good winning strategy, or they have a really good not losing strategy, right? And American lawmakers have a really robust, very decent winning strategy. But they're not playing not to lose, whereas hackers are. So you have a very different, I think their goals don't align, and you see that in kind of these weird corner cases where you see a hospital get ransomwared and then they pay the ransom, right? That's, what are you going to do? You can't let patients die. So it gets really interesting. I think that this is a very interesting field. We'll talk about it a lot more in our cybersecurity discussion.
Yeah, the Kali and cybersecurity streams. Is it safe if it isn't absolutely necessary and just involves more work on mine to just not include open source software?
So when you say safe, yes, if you fully trust everyone who's building all of the software and the software. I mean, to a degree, there's only so much that you can be logistically paranoid, right? Like, I use this computer, and I don't know anyone who built it, really, and there's all sorts of things that could be done against me through it. If Apple were a malicious, evil corporation, they might be, who knows. They could steal all of my information. They would own all of my bank accounts. There's not much I can do. And so, like, to a degree, you do have to surrender yourself to that, unless you are willing and capable of building something entirely yourself. However, even that is only half the battle. Let's say I go and I write my own kernel, I write my own compiler, I build everything, I build it all in machine code. So it's as low level as it gets, I don't have to rely on anyone else's coding. I could even write my own computer language and then build everything on that. That in no way guarantees that it's all safe. I might not have kind of built something using the institutional knowledge that the developers of Python had. They might be aware of some very niche, very minor bug that occurs only every once in a while and never really has to be dealt with except in very particular cases. And those people can hack my computer now. I'm not safe, right? So there's this sort of problem with, even if you built it all yourself, you are not necessarily any safer. So I guess no, there's not necessarily any way to be perfectly safe. But generally speaking, you can kind of bank on a lot of these forces working really well together.
Makes sense. I mean, even Apple sometimes has bugs that come out with like their terminal app years after they've been out for years, right, for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Had to step away for a moment, so apologies if you already answered this, but what's the difference between using EC2 and AWS Lightsail for hosting websites? As Greg does that?
That is a great question. I don't know enough about Lightsail to tell you definitively. My guesstimate would be that one of them gives you full control, and one of them is more similar to general hosting providers. And since I know what EC2 does, my guess is that Lightsail is more similar to usual hosting providers. However, I'm not entirely sure on that, and you'll want to double check that.
Or like GoDaddy or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why, that's why I write all my compilers from scratch in machine code for all my applications. You get good at it after doing it a bunch.
Yeah, I'd imagine you're probably pretty solid on that. Have you ever thought about teaching a course in it?
Yeah, that would be pretty good. Are you going to start something like F Society or any anti of that, Mr. Robot says that?
Not that I know of at the time. I feel like no comment is the way that a president would respond on that. Just, I cannot say. Not that I know of. All right. So after telling you that nothing is safe, nothing will ever work, and you should trust no one, we're going to go ahead and trust this device and these things. And I'm going to implicitly trust you guys to not just DDoS everything. And we're going to build a simple web server. So we have Python 3. Oh, my God. M, I believe, is for module. HTTP.server?
That was easy.
I'm really glad when I get the syntax right. Yeah, I'm out. Like, that's the end of that. Cool. So, I was just shocked that worked because I don't usually get syntax right on the first go. Although I guess I had it open a little while ago, so I was intuiting. So we're going to copy that in, and we're going to go ahead and just go and see what happens. Now, I mean, if you're familiar with what goes on in the web, and if you're familiar with what this should do, you should kind of intuit what's happening here and what will happen here. I apologize for the web traffic there. There we go, nothing. And you're kind of like, well, that's strange. And then you look back at here, and you're like, oh, port 8000. And you're like, oh, of course. Now, if you're really kind of hopping along, you'll be like, this won't work either, Nick. You're an idiot. And I'll be like, yes, you're so right. Except this is a bug that people run into constantly. And if you look on like an online forum, they're like, my AWS does not connect. I don't understand. And that's a really I mean, I mocked the question. But it's a very reasonable question, given that we've talked for a little while. You might have been reading a tutorial for a little while. You might have forgotten that in your security group, you actually only allowed certain IPs in. And you'll notice 8000 is not amongst them. So when I tried to go to 8000, that didn't work. Now, if that sounds contrived, then you are a god who's never encountered that sort of bug. I have encountered it frequently. And this is being someone who's aware of that bug. Now, we have the kind of, we'll say, required wait time as we cruise along through. We'll have to give that a second. We'll fill that with funny banter. There we go. There's only so many ways that you can be. Oh no, there's I think many ways that you can be humorous on the web. Let's see. We're going to add just our own custom TCP rule.
Would you say it's not computable, the number of ways that you could be humorous on the web?
I love that. Yes. Our professors here would, I think, either cringe or think that was hilarious. Or maybe both. Who knows? All right. So we've now allowed it. And AWS does a really good job of making that instant. Now, you might then go, wait a second, this is terrible. And I would thoroughly agree with you. In fact, you all can go here right now and check this.
Successful.
Right, so that just tells you, oh, right, it downloads them by default. Love that. If they're a file, it'll download them by default. If they're a directory, you can actually navigate through them. So the Python simple server just kind of serves your current directory.
So you're serving your SSH directory right now?
So if I had, on this server, if I had a bunch of like SSH keys and I had my own private keys that were linked to other things, this would have immediately invalidated the security of all of those instantly. Yeah, Thank you for copying that IP into the chat so that everyone can insta-click on it. Really appreciate that.
Get some traffic.
And if you're really kind of thinking about this, I don't know, and so we're going to test this in a second, but this is technically a web server. We have technically fulfilled all of the chat. We have built a web server. It works, I can get to it, and it even displays the worst possible things for me to be displaying to you. So technically speaking, we have accomplished what we said in the Twitch stream. Now we're going to move on and do other things, but something that might be kind of interesting would be if the relative pathing works. I believe Python simple server doesn't let you do that unless you have like a specific file in mind, which they might do. Yeah, it does not. So it doesn't just take you to that directory. This is considered the root directory of the web server, and it is something that you want to keep in mind for web servers. Is they have their own kind of root directory structure, and so if you're, I guess, clever, or if you're just like doing kind of basic good practices, that root structure should be pretty far away from your actual server. And it should only be owned by people like www-data. And if none of that made sense, don't worry, we're going to talk about it in a second. But basically, you don't want a general web server, which is a process, runs on your computer like any other, or on the server like any other. You do not want that process to be able to access anything else. Only that small sliver of your server should be accessible to that thing. Alternatively, so that is kind of the old mindset. That is, I guess I should have clarified that. That is the mindset of, I guess, the 2000s and before, is that you should just kind of like carve out this chunk, and that's for the web server. And anything that accesses the web server should only be able to touch there. So thus the danger of like a web shell. Like a PHP web shell is horrifyingly dangerous because it doesn't necessarily only access that chunk. However, there are other paradigms that exist now. So one of them is kind of the container paradigm, or the Docker-styled paradigm, which basically says you should have your own separate kind of containerized service that is the web server. So then, even if they took control over the whole thing, you just shut it down, spin up a new one. Problem solved. I actually really like that one. I think it's super clean. It's really easy to use. The other one is you should have a web server that is a dedicated web server. Excuse me. And what that means, and you might be like, well, yeah, duh. And that it sounds intuitive. It's actually a little less intuitive than it seems, in that that web server should have almost nothing else on it. No data, no images, barely even its own code. And it might not even really have its own code. There are some people who are really modular about this, where the code lives somewhere else, and this server just looks at the code and then it, like, kind of pulls it into memory and runs it from there. And so for some web servers, that's actually a really good paradigm. And so this paradigm means that you have one device, and all it does is web server stuff. It's always funny when something happens. Did someone hack into Nick's computer? I was going to say no, but very possibly. You know, like, I don't know. Possibly. If they did, they wouldn't see much. If they want my homework, they can do it.
This happened yesterday. I'm going to have to look at the script and figure out. It's like a Facebook thing.
Killing every once in a while.
I'm going to make sure that they'll see what's up with the live event. I don't think the live event ended.
Hopefully not. That would
No,
suck.
the live event's still going, so it wasn't that. But it was like a Facebook bug. It showed in the it showed in the
pipe,
the shell, or yeah.
Huh, interesting. Mortal Engines ad. Love it. All right, cool. So we are back.
Silver says frozen. Hopefully we're not frozen. I don't think we are.
Yeah, I think on the live stream that you pulled up, we were not frozen.
Yeah, that might have been playing video back from before.
Right.
Let's just make sure it's going to play.
Check.
There we go. Okay, we're still going.
Cool. All right, sweet. So yeah, you guys might have gotten some advertisements. You're welcome. Yeah, we planned that. When I was told as a kid, is like, if you fall on your face, just be like, I was just checking. You know, like, you're all good now. Like, gravity's still good. You're welcome.
There you go.
My apologies. Yeah. So yep, we're all back. Hopefully. A little bit ironic that we're talking about web servers and one of ours crashed, kind of. But yeah. So what we were talking about was different ways of kind of setting up a web server, and the way that we're dealing with is kind of the old style. We're going to carve out a chunk and have it do that. It is a little bit of the new style in that it's only going to host a web server, but it's not technically the new style in that we didn't really provision it that way. So just as an FYI. Cool. We are technically serving web servers. I think I can see all of your guys' requests, which is kind of cool. That's way more than the 4 requests that I put through. So yeah, your web server will put up requests. I can do Control-C and kill that. Cool. And so our web server no longer works. If you try to go back to it, it doesn't connect, which is good. That's the idea. Now, a lot of times this happens in network administration. You forget that you were serving on a particular port, and you actually need to like go back and do stuff, and then you change the port and things like that. It is also really important to, in like EC2's security group console, edit that rule and either remove it or disable it, whatever you'd like to do, just so that you don't leave extra ports open when you don't think they're opened. I realized that it looked like I was making a hand gesture, and then my hand just went whoop. That's just where this ends. Cool. So now 8000 is no longer an accessible port to our stream. Cool. So now this one, by default, will work eventually. But what we're going to do is we're going to install some other stuff to go on. If I tried to run this Python script and that was the only way I did web services, you would hate me as a website. It would suck. Just having like 5 people on it would kill it. Now, this server is not super powerful anyway, so even when I put kind of production level things onto it, it's not going to service all of us very well. But that's OK. In concept, it is the right idea. So with Python, actually, Waitress is a really common server that is used. But in Ubuntu, when you have full control over everything, then we can design our own little thing going on here. And so what we're going to build is called a lamp stack. We already have the L part of it. That's Linux. The A is Apache. So we're going to do sudo apt-get. Oops. Install. I add the -y because I know I want to include it, and it's fine. I don't really care about the size. Apache 2, so that is the actual web server itself. Now, it's weird because we're going to talk about this device as a web server and other things as a web server, and there's not much I can do about that. We're also going to grab, I believe, PHP 7. I don't remember if they include the .o, but it'll give me an error, and I'll fix it. So I'll put that at the end, actually. And that's the P, and then M is the MySQL. And I always forget the flags that are required for this. It's one combination of those, possibly.
I'll move this chat over here so they can see what you typed exactly.
Oh, sorry. There we go. So I have been reminded of what.
It's a little bit something like that, right? So MySQL server, just MySQL server. Oh, MySQL dev as well up above.
I tried to grab dev. Dev apparently doesn't exist. I know it's like 7 point something. There we go. I'll pull that command back up after it runs. I always like, you build enough things that eventually all of their like weird little numbers kind of combine together. On some things I want the -dev version. On some things I want 7.2.3. Some things I just want 7.1. Eventually, it all blends together. That's what Google's for. But the intuition is the right idea. So I know that I want Apache, I know that I want MySQL, and I know that I want PHP. And those are going to be the 3 kind of essential back-end parts to what's going on in our web server.
This chat UI can be smaller. I'll shrink it down a little bit.
It's funny because that chat window being in the screen doesn't really help you guys necessarily. Like you guys are like, that's redundant. But for people watching later, it's super helpful.
Yeah, the context.
It makes it, because otherwise we're just talking to voices. Like we could have just made up people and then we're talking to them.
We're pretty talented at it at this point.
We're very good at it.
All the ones that are like complimenting us too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's like a weird arrogance. Of, we like keep making up people. Like, thank you for joining.
Oh, Nick, you're such a talented hacker, such a talented white hat hacker.
We would belong in an insane asylum.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain. So yeah, the command I ran was up here. Yeah, you don't want that going on down in history, right? You become a politician, they'll bring it up. Just to kind of point it out, I am caustic says, but you hate PHP, and you're right. I still hate it, but we're going to use it. It's just because we're going to build a WordPress website.
It's like a love it or hate it.
Yeah, it's like I think people either just adore it and that's all they do, or they abhor it and they've never used it. I'm kind of in a weird state where I don't like it, but I have used it many, many times. I don't know. I can't really get away from it. So that's OK. Bhavik Knight also asks, why do you use apt-get? I think if you don't use -get, it still works. You are correct. There are a couple instances where that is not true. You can use apt without the -get with an install to install just normal binaries on your actual device. So if you're on a graphic version of Ubuntu, then if you pull like the Google Chrome binary, then you can install it using using the apt with no get and the install, but apt-get is not going to work for that. And the reason for that is basically the get means that you're reaching out to some sort of repository somewhere, or mirrors actually, and you're pulling stuff from them. That's what it's supposed to mean. There is a little bit of blending between those two in that apt will also do it if it can't find it locally. So just kind of things to know. You can configure that all over the place if you'd like, but that's the kind of standard idea of it.
Job Chase says, what if I don't know PHP, lol?
Well, good for you. We don't have to build anything in PHP. We're just going to include it because other stuff that we're going to use later relies on it.
And what is it that you like about WordPress to choose to build a WordPress website?
Sure.
Other options out of curiosity, says Twitch Hello World.
Twitch Hello World, that's a great question. I actually don't really like WordPress either. So I say that I don't like these things, and you guys are like, well, then why are we building them? And that's a great question. Very good intuition on it. I do actually like them as teaching tools. They do a really good job of showing you what exactly is going on behind the scenes, and they're just extremely well established. So people have used them for almost decades in some cases, and at least a decade in this case. And so you have a bunch of support and community and things for what we're trying to build. The other reason is a little bit more comical and a little less of a really good reason, in that I don't have a whole lot of time, and I forget how much time it takes to walk through any one of these things. So, and I mean, I'm not particularly pressed for time. I'm not like concerned like, oh man, I got to get through these things. So I basically set a series of like 5 or so goals for any one live stream, and we usually get through around 2 to 3. And the goal for that basically being is, first goal, can we get a WordPress or a AWS server up? We got that one.
Goal established.
Goal complete. Second goal, can I show that a simple Python script, a one-liner, can actually run a web server that is really dangerous? Got that one.
Really dangerous like that.
Really, yeah. I don't think the really dangerous was originally part of the goal, but I'm just re-emphasizing that's dangerous. Don't do it. And so we've done that. The third goal is to build a WordPress website. Now, if we get all the way through that, and my yammering doesn't, and I guess Colton and I's bantering doesn't carry us over kind of our time limit, then we will actually get to the fourth goal, which would be to build a Django website and put that on here. Because I think basically what we're going for is kind of simplicity and learning to something that works and is used in production. It's a commercially built thing, all the way over to something that is commercial and super heavily customizable and really kind of new agey. It feels very young and hip to use it. And then if we get all the way to the fifth one, the fifth goal basically being, can we build and customize a fully functional version of a CS50 pset, finance, and put it online? And that would just be kind of a cool last goal. It builds off of Django really well in kind of you downgrade to Flask, and that's what we do. So nothing against the Flask developers. You guys did a great job. It's just, I like Django's kind of wrapping it all in one. So there we go. We have now covered the goals that are set out in a Twitch live stream, and we're going to see how far we can get through.
And also, WordPress is fairly you can get paid.
It does all sorts of things.
WordPress websites.
Yeah. There's all sorts of jobs for WordPress people, like developing stuff ranging from filling it with content to customizing the whole thing to maintaining it to securing it. There's all sorts of reasons that you might want to do stuff with WordPress. WordPress is used by a bunch of enterprise level people too. I believe, now I want to Google this because I don't want to be incorrect. Major WordPress users, I believe Fox News is built on WordPress.
And also Lazik88, Jesus Christ, that haircut is trolling my haircut a little bit.
Is that my haircut?
You know, my haircut. Jimmy Neutron.
Oh, your haircut.
He's going to be Jimmy Neutron. It is a little bit messed up today. There's a little bit of funkiness going on the side.
I like the sharpness to it. You know?
Yeah,
it's
not
just very
supposed to
clean.
look like that. It's a little bit screwed up, but I did my best to make it work today.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of this clean cut haircut. I'm actually going to get a haircut soon to kind of match it a little bit.
You did yours somewhat similar to that recently.
Yeah, where you had this down.
The shaved sides.
Yeah.
Yours comes down a little bit as opposed to mine's kind of like more vertical.
Do you use product? Not at all related to this.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Yeah, we talked about in a prior stream, there's hairspray and big sexy hair volumizers, all this stuff.
Sweet. Yeah.
So fabulous.
Yeah. Welcome to our streams.
Yeah. Fashion tips from CS
Colton and Nick. Yeah.
There we go.
Oh man. Yeah, and we do cover CS from time to time. We do get there eventually. Yeah. So I don't know why I clicked the link. That was going to be much slower. Yeah. There's a bunch of actually major organizations. If you haven't heard of any of these, I don't know why the official Star Wars blog is a major organization, but Bloomberg's on there.
That's
BBC America, New Yorker, things like that. TechCrunch is a great one. So they all use WordPress, and if you ever go look at their websites, you might have your own opinion on them, but they are definitely well built, and they're definitely major companies. So WordPress is a totally valid thing to build and and get good at least it will be for the next, I'd say, 2 to 5 years, and it teaches a bunch of practices that you'll use later anyway. Cool, so we've installed all of our stuff, plus or minus. I say plus or minus because, like, have we really? But we have technically installed stuff. And so, wow, taking that statement out of context, I would criticize a student for being so vague. So if I run status all on my services, and if you are a fan of using initd, stop. But also if you're a fan of like using systemctl, things like that, totally fine. I just use service as my favorite command of choice to check on what's going on. And so we have Apache 2 running now, which is great. It means that things are going. I just looked up. It's funny because we look up to like make sure that things are on the screen where we intend them to be. But every once in a while, I kind of like skim the chat. And I saw that, is that Salty Eric?
Yeah, Salty Eric.
Yeah.
Wait, this stream was about tech?
Wait, this stream? Yeah. Yes. I hope that didn't shock you too much. Cool. And we get Apache 2's Ubuntu default page, which is great. And I say great because if we didn't get that, we messed up. It didn't work. And I would be like, well, debugging live.
Time to debug live.
Yeah, never my favorite.
Always my favorite time.
Oh, man. So they give you a little bit about their directory structure and a bunch of other stuff. And you're like, cool. If you read through all of that, and I'm sure you're all pinging that now, there's like stuff there that's really cool. But I happen to know var www HTML is where Ubuntu stores web stuff by default. And so what we can do here is we can LL that, and we have index.html. If we cat index.html, unsurprisingly, you're going to get roughly the page that you just saw. So that's all really cool, handy dandy, blah, blah, blah. But we're also going to copy over a PHP page. And we're going to make sure that it loads PHP homepages as opposed to HTML homepages first. So let's go into Etsy Apache 2.
And also Mad King Vala, thanks for following. And if Mosman, I think I got Mosman 820.
Oh,
but
yeah,
if I didn't, then
I love that it has like the little. Did you pull that sprite?
It's one of the default themes, like the widget themes you can get for the alert box. So we just integrated the work box, or the alert box last week, and it's super cool.
Huh, nice.
It has a lot of cool stuff.
It's kind of awesome. Because I like saw that and I was like, oh, that's cute. All right.
Context. Context is everything.
Context is everything. If you read through these confs, this can tell you all sorts of things about like how you define where certain users can go, and it's a really useful file. I'm just not going to touch it a whole lot. We will edit something in it somewhere because I believe we need an option for WordPress in particular. I'll have to Google that to check it. But what we are going to test is in mods enabled. Oh, and they might have moved this. It might not be in mods enabled anymore. I think it's under dirconf. There we are. Love it. I think these are symlinks, so unwritable. Yeah, you're right.
Colton, when will we do the part 2 of Space Invaders? Probably next week. This week is going to be a bit busy with the hackathon going on Thursday. We have another stream tomorrow. So Thursday and Friday, and then the weekend, probably not this week, but probably next week, most likely. Is Windows dead?
Is Windows dead? No, certainly not. All sorts of enterprise level things are built on Windows. And I used to be one of those people who thought it was just really cool to like mess with Windows. But they built all sorts of, okay, I should really remember the name of that. Built all sorts of just awesome things and are responsible for a lot of the world. Why is that not writable? Sudo, right. So to answer your question about Windows, no, they are not dead in the sense that they are still responsible for a lot of major enterprise structure in the world. However, in tech right now, it is really cool to rag on Windows. And I mean, I don't blame them. I don't like their interface. I don't really like the way that their like shell is built. I don't like the way that their kernel works. I don't like a lot of things about Windows. However, because they are used in all sorts of enterprise level solutions and things, and if you're doing something on like a big finance networks IT department, you really should understand how to set up a domain controller. How do you deal with like having certain people on your domain versus not on a domain? How do you deal with like the different kind of hierarchical structures for a Windows, like a proper Windows domain? How do you build all of that? It scales really, really well. And so if you're at like a school system, and there's a reason that schools use Windows for almost everything. I think Harvard uses kind of this weird blend of Windows and Mac, Apple Computer, but they do generally have the kind of Windows configuration for the like domain setup. And the reason for that is it scales brilliantly well. It was built brilliantly well for enterprise enterprise solutions. So as an individual user, I don't like it. I would never use it. Well, would never use it. I use it for some things like gaming, but other than that, I don't really touch it. But if I was building a business, I would probably avoid Apple. They're not super cost effective, and I can scale a Windows machine. There's already services and tutorials and community built around scaling Windows machines to enterprise level solutions on the order of thousands of employees. So as a business owner, as a young business owner, and I would say the caveat being an inexperienced business owner and non-business owner, it would seem to me that that would be a really obvious solution. And the reason that I think that's super important is Windows machines, a lot of viruses and things are still written for Windows. People used to think, oh, well, a Mac is unhackable. That's not true. That's just because why would I hack Johnny Appleseed when I could go hack JP Morgan? And they're built on Windows and you're running a Mac, right? So this would be that's kind of one of the main reasons that a lot of viruses and malware is written for Windows machines in particular. Also, a lot of like hospitals trying to be cost effective, they did the same set of choices. So they are also on Windows. And hospitals are a awful and kind of unfortunately somewhat frequent attack target for ransomware attacks because they have such a high priority on their tech working all the time.
And Buxy and Kabashmir, thank you very much for following.
Yeah, we appreciate
Kabashmir,
it.
hello. See you in the chat there.
Hello.
Windows is the WordPress of operating systems. It was glitched out. And is this the real life or is this just fantasy with the Queen references from Imran Ahmed? I'm not sure what's the reference to again. What's the time limit again? I don't know if he's referring to the stream, but generally we go for about 2 hours.
2 hours or so, yeah. At some point I like to eat dinner. Which is roughly the marking limit there.
I went 4 hours yesterday. That was the longest one that I've done. Because Space Invaders is kind of long.
Yeah,
we
that's a very long
relatively robust note. So we added features.
I mean, if we were, well, maybe like, if we do a live stream during like reading period or right after all my finals, I could go for a long time.
Like a hacking tutorial.
Yeah, or if we like came in and played games or something. Like, you know.
That could be like
kidding. That's not. Yeah. We can think about it. Okay, so what we did here was this is an Apache specific web server conf, but the LAMP stack is one of the most common and prolific stacks across the internet. So we're going to talk about it somewhat in depth. So we basically just said that when you're looking for the index page, what do you serve up by default? Look for index.php first, then look for index.html. And originally index.html is the first one, and then it goes like CGI, PL, and then PHP. I don't know the reason for making that choice, but it is a choice that was made. So we have now flipped those two so that it will now serve PHP by default instead of HTML. Now, if we wanted to test that, and this is where you will get to see my, oh no, terrible typing and lack of knowledge of PHP, all in one go, actually. This is a root-owned directory. Index.php. You will get to see my complete lack of knowledge on what PHP actually does. Well, how to actually properly use PHP. That might, I don't know if you wrap that in tag, we'll find out. I don't, that looks roughly correct to me.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've done PHP, but I think that is correct.
I hope it's like roughly
We'll
the
find
right
out.
Oh no. Okay, well, apparently not. Oh wait, also, I always forget this. Hey, you can see that live. We should restart the server to make those changes take effect. And when we pull this, we get nothing. I don't remember the PHP info page syntax. That's okay. We will Google that real quick to, actually, yeah, we can just PHP info page, phpinfo.php page. Thank you. Oh, it's literally PHP info, not .info. I was so close. So close.
That makes sense. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to just double check the rest of my, oh, yeah, so close.
Yeah, they have a very functional,
very functional paradigm.
Yeah, API.
I was thinking that object-oriented programming.
I should say procedural, not functional.
There we go. Beautiful. Love PHP. I don't. I really just like it. Cool. So we have now validated to ourselves.
It's a very opinionated stream.
Yes, it's a we're getting some like close to politics, like hair jet, like there's some Jimmy Neutrons coming. I don't know. We're like really going for it here, and I hate PHP. There's some developer of PHP that might come across this one day and just be like, really, man? Like, why?
Teardrops into the keyboard.
Or he's probably more realistically like, well, you don't understand anything. And it's like, yes, I don't understand a lot about it, and here we are. So I have both index.html and index.php in the same directory, and yet we're serving the PHP one, which means we're good. We have configured Apache correctly to host our WordPress stuff. Now, the next thing we need to really configure is a MySQL database to fit with WordPress. Now, I will, I guess, perpetually forget how to do this properly. So that's lovely. I don't actually know if that starts up by default. Let's double check that. Anytime you can't connect to something, but you feel like you should be able to, it's a good, oh, of course it's up. Awesome. I believe it's something like this. -P might be good. Except I never set up a password. That is a great question. You know what we're going to do? We're going to, oh, OK, apparently you can't exit out of that. We're going to sudo access that and see what happens there. Boom, MySQL. Love how that works.
That's fantastic.
That was terrifying. Cool. So I don't remember the exact syntax for what I'm going to try and do. So what we're going to do is pull up the WordPress tutorial, lamp stack Ubuntu. I like to just throw a bunch of keywords at Google and see how good it is at filling it. And it's really surprisingly good. I throw in all sorts of random
If you write the right
crap.
keywords, you might even get a job offer.
That's crazy. It's I've never thought of that. Weird.
Have you seen that?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. That is a very good point.
I haven't gotten lucky enough to get that.
I have not either.
Tried. No, I'm just kidding.
There is a. If you type in a high enough prime number, I think you can get Google to. Don't quote me on that. There is something where you can kind of like keep doing enough mathy things that eventually Google's like, hey, send us your resume. Or you get like a coding challenge, and there's like 6 levels or something.
That's true. Yeah, I saw the coding challenge part.
Yeah, that was kind of cool.
I thought that was a cool way to seek out like potential employees.
Nifty. Gotta love, I mean, when you control the search engine, you might as well. All right, so what we did here was we created a database called WordPress, shocking. And we then set some stuff about its like characters stuff. We're going to create a user. Now they highlight very nicely of them in red, I think, or green. They highlight for you not to leave those by default. We're going to type this in plain text, and you're all going to see this and possibly hack my WordPress website. If I was 12 years old, that would make me really upset.
Oh, speaking of 12, actually, what was it? Mosman20. Where's the message at?
Oh, right there.
I'm 12 and I'd like to learn more about internet security.
That is awesome.
I still don't understand how you installed Apache server on a server.
Right. So that is a great question. Apache is actually just a set of processes that we call a server, which is kind of strange because we call the hardware system that it's on also a server. It's one of those things where you're actually using the same term to describe 2 very different things. So I could actually run a bunch of different servers on one hardware device. One hardware server or machine or box is another term frequently used for it. And so what that basically means is I can run, I mean, the only limiting caveat is which ports go where. So I can only have one service attached to or bound to port 80 at a time, with a caveat. But generally speaking, that's true. So what ends up happening here is I could actually run an Nginx server and an Apache server and a Django server all in the same box, totally fine, assuming I have the resources for it. And I could just have them listen on different ports. I could have my Apache server on port 80. I could have my Nginx server on 443. And I could have my Django server only listening to, like, maybe it's a mail server. I don't know why we built it in Django, but sure. We built it in Django, and it only listens on port 21, right? So totally valid, and it definitely causes some sort of confusion with what's going on as far as terminology goes. So great question.
JP Guy, thank you for joining us. Hey everyone, how
welcome.
are you doing? And Ashley was saying that she was upset about his betrayal over, they were talking about choosing the spaceship, and I think he betrayed.
Oh, that's rough.
Ashley.
That was real rough.
Offering pineapple pizza is a crime to humanity. Oh, I don't know about Dan. Dan Coffey would disagree. Dan Coffey is a huge fan of pineapple on pizza.
Yeah.
Pepperoni pineapple.
I am also a huge fan.
Yeah,
I like
I think it's good. It's a little sweet, savory,
I like
mixed
that.
together.
I'm a big fan.
It's for refined palates only. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You gotta be like fashionable. You know.
Yeah, Is there a way I can include a binary into my security?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that.
Yeah, sure.
Yes and no. It depends on what exactly you mean. So if you wouldn't mind specifying, then we can clarify that for you.
Not the installation part, says Jacob Charleston.
I think talking about how you installed a server on a server. That'd be my guess.
Oh yeah, that might be it. I think I'm gonna stick with Namecheap for now. This AWS seems too difficult as I'm a cost.
Right, so it does require that you go in and build some actual parts to the server yourself. So if you want to use some sort of actual hosting, AWS, I believe, does have hosting services. We are kind of just dealing with the low-level hosting, where we build all of it. But yeah, you're totally welcome to use whatever you're comfortable with. This gives you a lot more power and control over what you actually build.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, like making a blog or something, something
probably unnecessary,
simple, like Namecheap. But this would be like if you're building a business that has a bunch of services and other stuff.
Exactly.
Like that. A lot more complicated. CS50, for example, is all uses AWS for all of its online services.
Yeah.
Well, not everything. GitHub Pages we do use for
for some of our docs, I think.
More static documentation and websites, like the course website that you and I did, for example, that was GitHub Pages.
Right.
But yeah, definitely for more sophisticated, I think, business purposes. Food is the only subject we haven't covered yet. That's true.
Wow, yeah.
We've covered literally everything else.
Yeah, we've hit at least almost everything. Wow, we are the sum total. There we go. Now people really think
what you learn at Harvard Business School and what you don't learn at Harvard Business School.
I love that. I love when they put them next to each other and they're like, this is everything. This is it.
Literally everything in the world. I can't watch the stream anymore since JP because we said
pineapple pizza.
Yeah, exactly, yep. All right, AWS S3 is good for something simple.
So AWS S3 is their storage buckets. It is really useful if you want to store static assets somewhere. So let's say you want to combine the power of Heroku and the power of AWS. Then maybe what you would do is, let's say I built a Django server, I'm hosting it on Heroku, and I want all of my static assets to not be running from the Heroku server. Heroku's not actually really built that well for throwing static assets back out to you. Let's say you have let's say you're rebuilding Flickr. So you're displaying pictures all over the place. Then it's actually really problematic for Heroku to try and serve each of those images to your users. Especially if you scale up and maybe you become a little bit more popular, then that becomes really difficult. Whereas AWS, they're a workhorse. They are really well optimized for just delivering content no matter where you are in the world. And that's a really cool infrastructure to be able to leverage, and S3 does exactly that. So if I wanted to, it basically serves as a content delivery network, or CDN, and if I wanted to take some sort of images and just store them on my bucket, my S3 bucket, then I can have a Heroku website that just pulls from that bucket anytime I want content delivered to some user. And that's a really great thing to use.
Alex MLW and Neonzen Knight, thank you very much, both of you.
We appreciate that.
Mosman says, I have practiced HTML5 for a long time. Can I use it in my computer security?
And then it is pointed out by Jacob. Oh, yeah. How did you say that?
I'm not sure. I think it's Job. Yesterday we talked in the chat. He says it's J like Java. Job. I'm not sure if it's Cochason or Cochason or any possible permutation of syllables.
Well, we'll get your name right eventually.
Job Cochason, Job Cochason says HTML is a markup language.
Yes, HTML is a markup language. However, it does have some implications for security, especially when dealing with browser security. So HTML5 is really nice. It has all sorts of things dealing with caching and whether or not certain scripted attacks actually really work well or not. It also deals in how it interacts with the browser itself. So there are certain practices that Safari has that they deal with HTML5 better than they do with just HTML, and there are certain, actually I think in general browsers are going to handle HTML5's practices better than HTML. A lot of it deals with caching and whether or not certain things are stored and where they're stored. So it is a markup language, but basically anything that is delivered along the pipeline from you to your client does have some impact in security. And it is something that the more of that you overlook, the more opportunities, basically the bigger the attack surface is. So the less of it you overlook, the smaller the attack surface is, well, in concept. And then no onboard, no onboard or non-board says S3 can be used to work with big data. They have scripts to help you manage data. Yeah, AWS, they go the full 10 yards when it comes to managing data with you or for you. For you scares me. I don't want people touching my data unless I ask them to. But AWS does a really good job of providing you with a bunch of tools to deal with your data as it comes in, how it's dealt with, how it goes out, latency, things like that. They give you all sorts of metrics and things. They probably give you way too many things for the average user. But it is certainly better to have that than too few things. So yeah, they do all sorts of great things. Cool. So we are granting, in the web server that we are building, in the WordPress website we are building, we are granting all, so grant all permissions for read, write, and there's probably a couple other operations you could do, on WordPress.star. So WordPress is the database. .star means all tables within that WordPress database. And we're giving them to the user admin at localhost, identified by, cool, my character stopped, oh, that was nifty. we're going to bring all our characters back. Look at that.
Advanced Linux.
That was the best Linux command you'll ever see is the left arrow key and the right arrow key. Identified by a password, which you can all see, which is great.
Invisible ink.
Yeah, that was kind of cool. I wish I could control that. I don't know. Maybe you can. So we have now done that.
Password.
Yeah, that would be perfect. There's all sorts of ways to like put in passwords in like hidden text. I'm just not using them, and I don't know if WordPress or if MySQL does them by default. Obviously, it doesn't need to. So we've now created a database, and we have created a user. Well, I don't know if we created a user. We might want to create a user. No, we're good. So we have now also created a user for what's going on here. And we have a database. We have stuff behind here. We're all good. So now what we're going to do is flush. Oh, there's. Man, I always forget how to spell is another one. Cool, that worked. And then we're going to quit. So we have now left MySQL to its own devices, and we're going to move on. We now basically just have to grab WordPress. We don't actually have it on our site. So now I know in that DigitalOcean blog they recommend doing something different than what I'm about to do, but we're going to do it this way because it works the same, and the security concerns that they're dealing with, or kind of the like modularity they're dealing with, is not necessary. And I actually argue this being a little bit cleaner as far as where you go. Oh, right, there's a million PHP extensions that you can grab for WordPress, and we'll grab them in the background. I always forget about them, and they're not all useful at all times, which is the annoying part. And I don't remember if it's like if you append this. Oh, okay, that works. So we're gonna do this. I don't actually know. You know, we're gonna find out what this does on its own, and we'll see. So while that's installing, we're gonna go to WordPress's website, and we're gonna grab WordPress. That's shockingly what we need to do. So WordPress does this really cool thing where they call it their like 15-second install, or their maybe it's their 5-minute install. It's this like very short time frame, and they intend it to be really impressive. I don't know why I typed in there. I could have typed elsewhere. That's fine. So let's go to WordPress.com, and we're going to go to. They also let you host through them too, which is cool. But we want to download. Maybe they put that under developers. Howdy, developers. Cool.
Howdy, developers.
Yeah, all two of us.
Imran says, who's your girlfriend? I'll leave the relations to the databases.
Ah, love that. I don't know exactly where they put their actual code base. Usually, OK, wait, we can just do WordPress. Gotta love the power of Google. WordPress, download.
I think he's saying his name is pronounced Job Consciouson, or he or she. I think it's that's a middle name. Job Consciouson. I think that's how you're supposed to say it.
OK, good to know. Thank you. Yeah, we always like try to get your usernames right. I do a much worse, like a noticeably worse job that compared to Colton. Colton like gets them pretty well.
I try. We had a lot of practice over 18 episodes. This is episode 18, I believe.
That's awesome. So we're going to copy the link to that. If you're like, wait, why didn't you just download it? It's because it wouldn't have worked. Oh, right, they use the latest.tar.gz. That's one of the greatest practices ever, by the way, is you just like keep the URL the same and you just update underneath. That's super helpful, because then they don't have to like update to pull the newest one, which is really cool. So we now have that tar.gz in here, so we can do tar. I think there's a bunch of other commands that would have also worked here, but we're going to do that. And that's going to unpack it for us. If you didn't see that command, I always forget the flags to this. Well, I like know them by memory now. But yeah, XVZF. X is for extract, V is for verbose. I don't remember what Z is, and F. I also don't remember. So you know, they do things. There's letters. Couldn't have said it better myself. So then we can go into WordPress. And we have a whole WordPress directory structure in here, which is great. So what we can do is, and if you were being like pretty cyber conscious, then what you can actually do is say, check the, I was saying something and I completely forgot what I was saying as I said it.
I know how that feels. I've done that many times.
There we go. You can check the hash. So generally speaking, that if you're downloading some sort of major package from some sort of repository or website, they'll give you a hash to kind of guarantee or make you feel slightly more secure about the fact that you got what they intended you to get. Now that relies on them having not been hacked, which means that it only really truly protects against man-in-the-middle attacks. And what I mean by that is, the only way that that's actually a secure way of validating what you got handed is if the attacker is in between you and the provider, CDN. Because if they got control of your CDN, they could change the product and then rewrite the hash, redisplay a new hash to you, and you would confirm the product with the malware in it, and you'd have no way of checking that. So we now have an entire WordPress directory, and what we're going to do is copy-r WordPress and all of its delightful contents, and what we're going to do, that's var www.html/dot, and we're going to just throw that all in there. Of course we can't, because that requires sudo access. Cool. And then we're going to go var www.html. Now we're going to do some interesting things here. We're going to chown-r. I always forget how exactly chown works. Oh, wow, that was dumb. In my head, I was like, man, chown. And then I just typed man and expected it to work. So we're going to chown-r, change the ownership of www-data, www-data. Oh, that's not going to work because that's not a good user. Man, I always forget how this works. Give me 1 sec to look up chown. It's like a owner group file. Cool. So we're going to we're going to chown-r 755 Ubuntu and the group www-data dot. That sounds right. Oh, and we have to use sudo to do that because it's currently owned by us.
Apple Pie.
Oh no.
Hope I didn't miss any of those.
I don't exactly understand why that didn't work. My apologies. There's only so many commands I can keep in my head. So chown directory syntax. We'll find out. Gotta love that. Oh, that looks roughly right. Oh, right. I'm a dummy. I was mixing 2 commands. So yeah, you don't actually need to change. Yeah, we were trying to do something real weird with that. That worked. There we go. So what we were originally trying to do was mix chmod, which changes the modification, and chown, which is something that you do when you have not slept a whole lot in the past couple of days. So there you go. Live study and how that works. So we now, if we do ll, we can see that these are all owned by the user Ubuntu and www-data, which is kind of just the data group for the World Wide Web. Cool. So something that has been pointed out a little bit earlier, and I kind of ignored it by accident, was by Twitch Hello World, which said, I thought you said in an earlier stream it is better to avoid using sudo to gain access, and instead rather to access directly. Those said you do actually access using sudo a lot in practice. Yes, so what I'm doing here is I am saying basically don't do this and stay as root. That means that you're going to basically just have full control and nothing will ever stop you. No one will even really ask, which is terrible. Keep yourself in some sort of sudo accessible user. Now, what I also advise against is just arbitrarily typing sudo. The reason I'm using sudo here is because we are actually trying to access the root permissions. Excuse me. Because originally this directory was owned by root. So the only user who should really be able to modify it is root. And so sudo gives me access to root, and then I'm going to do something to what root actually owns. And so what I'm kind of doing by explicitly doing it that way is I'm saying I acknowledge this is owned by root. I'm going to kind of temporarily run a command as root, and that should all be congruent. I'm running commands owned by the same person who owns this directory. So yes, generally, as a rule of thumb, if you're using sudo, you should think in your head, why am I using sudo? That is a great question and a good intuition that I would never get rid of. Keep that. It'll prevent you from running kind of willy-nilly commands.
Ahmed Osman said, can we make a stream about building multi-tenant architecture, which is the base for SaaS applications?
I guess we probably could. I don't know enough about it, though, I don't think, to do a stream. But we could find someone who does.
We have to find somebody.
Or we could educate ourselves on it and then do it.
True, true. Over the winter break.
Yeah, that could be a winter break project. There's all sorts of things that are on my winter break docket. Cool. And do we have any other comments that we are missing?
They're talking about name pronunciation. So Jab Kachasan is talking about how there's no this letter. I'm not exactly sure what that translates to. And Job, if you wouldn't mind tossing where you're from again in the chat if you haven't done that already.
Yep.
I don't recall offhand. JP guy says his native tongue is Dutch.
Wow.
So I'm guessing he's from the Netherlands then.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Apologies, JP, if I'm incorrect. And seeing you guys have to Google syntax makes me feel so much better.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we can do that more if you'd like. I mean, sometimes I'm just guessing along intuitions and hoping that I'm like roughly correct. I mean, syntax is generally something that I think in a really kind of serious way, you shouldn't really spend too much time memorizing. I mean, a lot of this I've memorized just by doing it enough, but I would recommend not memorizing it. It's not worth your time. The only times that I guess it might be time like valuable are if you, in a job environment or a work environment, are typing kind of the same set of parameters or set of codes over and over again. Then you don't want to have to Google it every single day. That'd be kind of ridiculous. But you'll memorize it by kind of just doing it over and over again. I mean, that's how I generally memorize these. I would generally generally speaking, I would usually say that you shouldn't just sit down and memorize syntax for the sake of memorizing syntax. It is very rare that that is useful. There are some languages, some functional languages, that do help you teach and understand certain paradigms and things about programming as kind of like a meta concept. But other than that, I would generally advocate against memorizing just syntax. I would usually try and motivate it through some sort of project. Do a couple of those kinds of projects if you want to like really get that syntax down. But otherwise, it's not necessarily super useful. And Googling syntax is now a tool available to us.
Super easy, yeah.
Why not?
Much easier than it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Before Google existed, would definitely be very difficult to Google things.
Books.
Oh my God, I can't imagine trying to just use a book for syntax.
Software development would have been a little bit rough.
Yeah, that would have hurt. I have a lot of respect for the people who were doing that and who were writing full programs in assembly. That terrifies me. Awesome. There's some other stuff. Isn't it useful in C since the language is so small and so technical? I thought maybe Python too, since it seems like it will be used so often. This is asked by Twitch Hello World. So in any language, it is useful to know syntax off the back of your hand, or off the top of your head, sorry, because it's going to make you code faster. However, it has been pointed out by experienced developers, to myself, and just kind of through my own experience, coding faster does not always mean you're coding better. Frequently, people are coding really quickly, and they write a bunch of code. They write thousands and thousands of lines of code, and then you look at it and you ask them, well, where are your unit tests? How have you sat down and debugged each part? And they might tell you, oh, I haven't yet. Haven't yet is a very scary term in CS when you are building an enterprise level project, because how do I know that when you add that into our code base, you don't crash the whole thing? Now, hopefully we have continuous integration tests and things like that, but in general, I would be very, very careful about how that actually works.
And thank you to Wizard23 for the follow as well. Make sure I got that name correct.
Yes.
And then we have a couple of other questions. Could you please add to the future streams list? That would be interesting because kind of if you research building multi-tenant architecture, most of debates. I'll have to take a look and find somebody probably. I don't know if realistically we'll have time, us necessarily over the break to look at that specifically, but if I know anybody that knows about that, definitely we can take a look at that. For security, you should have the web directory of your new WordPress in your user folder and then deal with permissions, then use virtual directories and Apache rules to override some permissions.
Yes, I thoroughly agree with that. Also, you should certainly configure permissions before you move stuff into a directory that's accessible to the web. And the reason for that being that while it was in kind of this weird permission state, there might be something that they could take advantage of there. Now, in this case, I showed a private SSH key on the screen. I don't know how concerned we are with like really strict practices on security, but that is a really good point that you don't want anything to be available to the public until you are positive that it is ready for the public.
That'll be for the next stream, the cybersecurity.
Yeah, we will talk about it very rigorously, well, much more rigorously in the cybersecurity stream.
Which functional programming language should I learn first? Another language taught CS50, Python, most comfortable, JavaScript, least comfortable, plus learning Java.
Right. So Java is another object-oriented programming language, and a very good one to know at that. I would count it as kind of, well, actually, I don't want to say that because it'll upset everybody. So yes, functional programming languages are worth learning. However, I mean, imagine asking the same question but with object-oriented programming languages. Which one should I learn first? Some people will say Java, some will say C#, some will say C++, some will say Python.
C# for life, boy.
C# for life. Love that. I actually don't develop too much in C#. I do love C++. And they have enough similarities that they're similar-ish. I don't mind transitioning from one to the other. Functional programming languages, the first one I learned was OCaml, actually, but I'm a huge fan of Clojure. I think it's really well done. So as long as you're focusing on the paradigm and why functional paradigms can be really, really useful, I think you're fine. I think you might want to also add in a practicality aspect to it, right? Where OCaml's not used necessarily all that often, whereas something like Clojure will probably be seeing more and more use cases from that, especially because it can transpile to JavaScript, so it's pretty portable. Things like that are really important to a lot of people. There's all sorts of languages. I mean, F# is also functional, but I don't know of many people using it necessarily. There's all sorts of reasons that you might use any one functional programming language, but I think as long as you're focusing on the paradigm, that'll help. And technically, you could do some form of functional programming in like a Java or in like a even you could technically do it in any language. Just whether or not they have kind of the syntactical sugar tools for it, that depends a lot on the language.
C++ even has lambda expressions now.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. And Python has a beautiful lambda expressions syntax. So like, yeah, you can do it in pretty much any language, I think.
Clojure would be a cool stream.
Yeah.
I would love to do a Clojure stream.
That'd be sweet.
I would need to deep dive a little bit deeper into it, but
yeah, same. It'd be fun. And it's come up a couple times now, I think.
Yeah,
it's come up.
I think that's our fate is being drawn.
We're going to Clojure.
Jacob Thompson, thank you for coming. They're saying that.
Yes, I appreciate it.
Tomorrow. How many more streams will you guys do? Well, you and I are probably going to do a few more.
Quite a few, yeah.
Going into next year, and we got one next week on C. You're doing one on C, and then after the winter break, to someone else's question, which was who asked that question? Izo. Winter break starts on the 12th for us. For me,
yeah, I think for me it's the 20th.
Oh, okay.
Brutal.
And then we'll be back. We'll be back for the 2nd of January, and then that week we'll probably stream on the 3rd and the 4th. So we'll take a couple weeks of a break in the winter while we get CS50 on edX going for next year, and then we're back. We'll be back at full capacity.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely tune in at that point.
Yeah.
And they're saying you can do functional programming in Java. It's ugly, but you can do it. It's Big 9-1.
Yeah.
I definitely have seen that.
Yeah.
Functional programming from basis per syntax with practical application.
Right. So I guess as far as like learning new syntaxes, eventually you should be at a point where learning new syntax isn't too bad. I mean, learning new syntax to the point of being a master at that programming language, I would argue is very difficult. But learning new syntax to where you're comfortable enough to like code up something simple, that shouldn't be too bad. I think that requires a couple hours of learning.
The basics like map, filter, reduce can all be learned. You can learn that in Python and JavaScript. You don't have to go too crazy and go to a functional language to understand what those are.
Yeah, exactly. And those are, I think that's a lot of it, right? If you understand that, tail left, tail right, you're pretty set as far as a lot of functional programming things go. It's then just like, can you start to see a lot of the applications for it? Can you start to see how it applies to algorithms? So take a common algorithm and do it in a functional way instead of in the object-oriented way. And actually
that's the hardest part is taking your procedural and object-oriented instincts and transferring that into the world of functional
Put it into
programming.
functional.
That's the hard part.
That can be pretty hard.
You do that, and that's where it actually.
I think that's the first piece set for our functional programming course here is literally take a bunch of stuff you've already done and do it functionally. And it's a hard struggle. Like people are like, oh God, this hurts. Like it's just not something you're used to.
Really
and there's a lot of things where you're like, this would be so convenient in object-oriented. All right, so we are almost there on our WordPress website. Things have been configured to where they are roughly the right permissions. Someone mentions using an htaccess file to configure stuff. htaccess has been. There's a lot of the community on Apache is moving away from htaccess just because it is not necessarily something that is super robust. What I mean by that is it's easy to have a bunch of them and then have them override each other, and you can control permissions a little bit easier. However, they are still used frequently, and a lot of tutorials still encourage them. So I'm not going to touch on it too much because it is kind of not necessarily considered a best practice anymore, though it is a totally valid practice. So we're going to kind of ignore it in favor of just setting our permissions to be relatively restricted, which we actually are not really doing here, but in concept you could. So with that in mind, we're going to deal with htaccess maybe never in a stream, but if we ever cover Apache explicitly, then we will certainly deal with it then.
MRC147, thank you very much for following.
Yes, we appreciate that. Every time someone follows, we appreciate it.
I like the sound.
Yeah, it's a really cool sound on our. I don't know if they don't hear that, right?
It'll be in the video, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Everybody in the chat, confirm if you can hear the follow notifications when it goes in the chat. We can definitely hear it in here. They probably hear it through the microphone, if anything, but I'm pretty sure it's in the actual video.
Yeah, that'd be kind of funny. It's very interesting to me what you guys hear versus what we hear. I don't know why I did status all. I know exactly what status I'm trying to change.
Yeah, they're saying they hear it. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. Oh joy. Spelling. There we go. Forgot to restart the database.
Oh, and some people are saying they can't. Okay, I'm not sure.
So it's like the dress, you know, like everyone's kind of like,
exactly.
We don't all agree. No one will ever agree.
The Yanni or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Ahmed Osman, thank you very much for following.
All right. Now, I might be missing a MySQL extension. Bummer. Let's go ahead and grab that from the tutorial that I so conveniently closed. Love that. There's all sorts of extensions. There's like a couple of minor things that I am certain I'm forgetting. Will live. I don't build with WordPress that often anymore, so we're going on like knowledge from a while ago.
That was Laurel and Yanni, that was what it was.
Oh, right. There we are. That is the name.
It's actually both names put together, and that's why you could hear, because the low frequency was
and they just had a bunch of different frequencies.
It was the other way, but yeah, the lower frequency bands were one name, and the upper ones were the other one. So if you filtered out either side, you would hear the other name.
That is good to know. Maybe I am not missing a MySQL thing. So let's go ahead and see if maybe we just messed up. Oh, we are missing the PHP MySQL extension, I believe.
I signed up for edX, but I have been busy with work, haven't started. Is it possible to catch up or re-sign up for the next session? I believe you can. I'm not 100% sure of the, I forget how the actual details work. I think you certainly can sign up. If you're taking it for free, you can sign up and do it whenever you want. For the certificate, I do think you can just turn in your work for the next course iteration and still get it. I don't think you're locked in, but the details should be on the website. I think it'll tell you what the deadline is. All of the new content from this year is going to go up around January. It'll be up January 1st, so if you want to start taking CS50 with the lectures that we taught this year, then that'll be an option to you. And you can see the lectures on YouTube right now, actually, too.
Sweet. Yeah, that one I wouldn't necessarily know a whole lot of an answer on. Oh, I do know this. Well, I don't know this one. I have a guess as to this one. You probably know this one. Why isn't CS51 on edX? I know they just recently kind of changed course staff, so they were dealing with a bunch of stuff with that. Just recently being the first year I took it. I've had that happen to me all the time, actually. Every single CS course I think I've taken except CS50 has had a change in professor every single time. Go figure. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, I don't know if they have the resources either, or at least like the production. They definitely don't have the production CS50 has.
Yeah.
I've been telling David we should try to get a 51 of our own implementation done at some point. I think that'd be really cool. How tall is David? David, I believe, is 6'2", 6'3".
Yeah, he's pretty tall.
If David's lurking in the chat, then definitely let us know how tall you are, David.
Yeah, throw that out in the chat.
People want to know.
In case there aren't enough people obsessed with you that you know, they have. I'm sure there's a compiled version of David somewhere on the internet.
A compiled version?
Like just like a compiled like fan page of David.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
like, there's got to be.
I think there probably is. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine.
He has a Wikipedia page, but I don't know if that's fan driven or how that works. But
yeah, I don't know either. Huh. Good question. So many questions that we all don't really necessarily know about. All right, so we have configured WordPress, kind of, except we deliberately left out, I deliberately left out copying over their config page. And the reason for that is it can sometimes cause bugs if you don't necessarily edit it correctly. And I promise you, I was going to edit it entirely incorrectly. So we're doing that through WordPress's interface, which is kind of nice. And so what ends up happening here is they tell you that, hey, you didn't actually create a wp-config.php file, and you're like, I totally, and then when you list everything out, you're like, didn't do that. And the reason that we didn't is because they have a sample PHP file, and in a lot of WordPress tutorials, the standard is to copy that over and then fill in your parameters. And they very clearly demarcate where you should fill in your parameters. However, we're going to deal with things here, and we're going to kind of actually go through WordPress's way of doing it and talk about why that's kind of cool, because it didn't necessarily exist before. So the database name is WordPress. Wow, we're so clever. The username is admin. The password is, shockingly, password 123.
I love how they don't even give you a, I guess it doesn't matter usually that it's not hidden.
Right.
For the sake of this, if you actually had a legitimate password. And
you really wouldn't want everyone seeing this, but that's okay. Here we are. Table prefix, we don't really care about this, but if you were running a bunch of WordPress databases or servers or things like WordPress actually does in the real world, then you might want to care about that. And we're going to submit that, but I can't write the PHP file. That's a huge bummer, big L. So what this basically does is it gives you the PHP file yourself. You can copy all of that. I really hope I copied that. And then we're going to nano wp dash.
Paste in your password on accident that you put in
man,
earlier.
That would suck.
If you did, that'd be hilarious.
I would not put it past myself. There we go. And you'll notice that this all got set up. Now, it also grabbed these hashes and salts for us, which is super convenient. It might have generated them for us. I don't exactly remember how they do that. I know that when you do it yourself, you can go to the api.wordpress.org and get them yourself and manually copy them. But we don't deal with any of the rest of these. Everything else is set up. There's my password again. If you want to hack my WordPress website, knock yourselves out. So now,
it's a good password.
Yeah, it's a very solid password.
It has numbers in it. That's important.
Exactly. There are numbers, no capital letters, but we could put one in there. Cool. So we have created it manually, pasted the following text into it. WordPress promises me that I can run installation. So I click that, hands off.
Samuta, thank you very much for following.
And now we can go ahead and create stuff. So site title, AWS Twitch demo in aggressive caps. There's a username, admin.
Because the world is RAW, I'm guessing probably round, but it got cut
round
off.
Would be a good, yeah.
Thank you very much for following.
And we're not going to confirm password. Yeah, we're going to confirm the use of a weak password. There we go.
A very weak password. Very
weak password. WordPress is sitting there like, ha ha ha, you weakling. Except WordPress gets hacked all the time. So, you know, like, I'm willing to accept that insult. And we're going to say admin. Oh my God, what? In 2 keystrokes, I deleted the URL for the page. Go figure. So admin@gmail.com. That's going to suck. Discourage search engines. Well, that's up to them. I don't know if Google actually follows that. You appear to have already installed WordPress. Well, that's kind of nifty. I don't think I did, but OK. And we log in. And we're going to log in with admin password 123.
Non-board.
That's not valid. Bummer. It should be valid.
And Twitch Hello World has been rooted out as Jacques in the Facebook group.
Oh, you guys suck. Just as an FYI, y'all are the worst.
What happened?
Someone beat me to it because y'all actually type faster than I speak. I've been locked out of my own WordPress website. You literally took me up on the go knock yourselves out. Now, if I had followed a user suggestion at the very, I'm still laughing at how hilariously funny that is.
They have like Illuminati things.
Yeah, there's a plant.
LOL live demo.
So I love doing live demos, and actually this is one of the better parts because it's just unexpected and really funny. So
Rookies, I think Bill might be here too. It might be the culprit.
Whoever's mocking us the most in the group chat, I would imagine is the person who did it, and that's kind of awesome. I did literally tell you to do it, so I appreciate that you followed that. And so, out of curiosity, well, maybe not out of curiosity, but we are going to, since we have a little bit of extra time, since I won't spend that building the WordPress website, it has been built, and I cannot admin it at the moment. We really appreciate that. You guys are great. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually run a small hack on it and see if we catch your password. So if you weren't clever with your password, then this will catch it. Don't change it. It'll be kind of cool. Or go ahead and change it. I don't know. But if it was something simple like password123 or password1234 or something very entertaining, then we'll actually crack your password, and that'll be kind of interesting. I think the chat will enjoy it, so it'll be kind of fun. I didn't do it, though I saw this. Paste link into chat. I'm always scared of clicking links in chats, but Colton is fearless. And he got a picture of Team Edward. Edward from Twilight.
Some great contributions from the chat. Appreciate that.
The chat is, you guys are hilarious. So we do all sorts of crazy things here at what is it? Twitch, CS50 on Twitch. Yeah.
CS50 on Twitch.
Cool. So somebody has cheated into this. I will say they could probably have been a little bit more creative with the title of the website. Could have been like hacked or something like that. Oh, they're commenting on the hair.
A little bit, Jacques.
That's pretty funny. All right, so we have this kind of cool utility. I have this kind of cool utility. It was built by some people that do some cool stuff. Also, I've changed my prompt a little bit. I was inspired by talking about prompt customization last time, so I actually changed it.
Happy face. Oh, and
yeah, so it changes if you run a command that doesn't exist, or it actually tells you the error code that prints from that command.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool too. I like that.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of cool, and that was kind of nifty. So if I run some sort of valid command, it goes back to happy face. Thought that was kind of cute. But what we're going to run is something called WP scan. And what this does is it allows us to scan a WordPress website. Ah, no! Why did that copy with it? Why does Nick forget how everything works? Cool. And this is going to tell us it's a WordPress website. And it's going to enumerate some kind of stuff that's going on there. And I can actually also pass it a password list. I don't remember if that's the keyword, but we'll find out. I have this password list stored somewhere. No. I think it's under... Wow. I'm so glad that I called that something reasonable. I don't know what's in passwords2.txt, but we'll find out.
Hi, I'm Zach Jones. Thank you for following.
Yes, we really appreciate that. I love the noise. Yeah, that's fantastic. URL.
I see a lot of seller stuff in there.
Yeah, there's some cool stuff in here. Oh, so this is homebrewed. Where is the password list? Word list. Every time. There's like only so many ways that you would think you could run this sort of thing. And yet there are way more than you will ever imagine. So we're going to throw WordPress Scanner at it. And if you are thinking, this is a script kiddie, hey, we know who it was. Really good on the name there. So if you are thinking script kiddie, you would be entirely right. This is a script kiddie sort of attack. However, I can explain to you what's going on underneath it, and I'm not going to use that as validation for me not being a script kiddie, but I think it is kind of funny. So we did end up grabbing one of your logins. I don't have a whole lot of passwords sitting on there. If you want to tell us your password, you can see this tool work. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. But we do know the username that is actually going on here, and we know that you're the only user on this WordPress website. So if I wanted to be really thorough, I would probably go on to like, I'm not going to go on there because I know some of the passwords are not pleasant. They use a lot of like bad words for passwords. People are naughty. So if you type in,
clearly,
yeah, y'all are a case in point of that. You guys are naughty. And so if you go on like GitHub, there's a seclist or secdev that does like just thousands of different kinds of passwords and like where they got them from and all sorts of cool things. And so if you go on there, you can just pull their password lists and snag them and then throw them through WordPress Scanner and see if you can crack people's passwords. It is a brute force attack. There are all sorts of ways in which they can detect this sort of attack. You'll notice I only threw 500 passwords at Maga's way of hacking our things. Someone asked, wait, is this a CTF? What CTF is this? It is not a CTF, but it's pretty close in concept in the idea. And we're kind of getting towards that. Actually, a lot of the CTFs that I build are very, very similar to that. This is not a CTF. This, if you just happen to hop into the stream, this is actually us building a web server. We are building a web server. This is not a CTF. Do not worry. We will, however, go through a live CTF later. So yes, I have now been locked out of my WordPress website, which is totally cool. I own the WordPress website, which is great. I can also shut everyone out using something like this. Actually, UFW allow, let's do allow 22. Oh, okay. UFW allow 20. Oh, no. That was the worst possible typo. I'm always afraid of doing that. I don't remember if it's disallow. Where is it?
And thank you, Elias Shatim1. You've been a regular for a long time. Thank you for following us.
So we'll deny port 80, which means you are no longer allowed, well, you should be no longer allowed to connect through our, oh, wait, sudo UFW enable. There we go. So yes, it may disrupt existing SSH connections. That would be normally very dangerous because I deleted my SSH key to literally prevent you guys from doing what you did to the WordPress website, which let's make sure that that's still true. Cool. And now that should prevent us from connecting to the WordPress website. So it's a decent like burn all cut corners strategy if you notice you've been hacked. In this case, I noticed I've been hacked. Now, my first technique was to hack back. Don't do that. That's a terrible first strategy. However, a good first strategy would be for us to then disable all connections, shut down all resources. I've explicitly denied 80, but UFW will deny everything else too that's not explicitly allowed. So I am also just being extra secure in that. But I also explicitly allowed 22 so I can connect myself. And that makes sure that you guys are all shut out. The World Wide Web is shut down with regard to my server. If I wanted to be really thorough, then I might go back into our management console and edit the inbound rules and say, you know what, I wasn't even using 443, so get rid of that, and I'm going to nuke port 80 as well. And now I'm pretty sure that I have blocked myself out of the internet. Now, that might be a dangerous first strategy. I'll go on a very brief tangent since we have now completed up to stage 3 of our plans for today. We've completed it roughly on time, actually. And it'll give me a little bit of a moment to talk about a better strategy, which is you should actually kind of let your attacker go for a little bit and watch them. Once you've noticed it, it's a decent idea to try and contain them, but let them not know they've been contained. So if there is some sort of way of sandboxing them without them noticing, that's fantastic. And the reason for that being that I can design a beacon, right, that gets implanted on your server and goes out and pings back to me and, I don't know, gives me information or lets me connect back to you as a shell or something. And that beacon might detect whether or not I have internet connectivity or whether or not the beacon can reach out. And if I shut everything out, I kind of just pull my computer off of the internet and leave it in some sort of like, it's like, you could refer to it as like an air-gapped state of some sort, then that might actually not help you because your attacker might disappear. You might think your attacker's gone. Then when you connect it to the internet again, you've put a bunch of new protocols in place, you've changed all of your passwords, all of your keys, everything's been re-encrypted. That attacker is still there, and they're now just as bad as they were before, but you think you're safe, and that's much worse. So generally speaking, if you can kind of play this kind of counter-subterfuge game with your attacker, that actually helps. Nonboard points out honeypots. Honeypots are a really good idea in concept, especially if you can execute them really well. However, I would advise being very, very careful with that, because if your honeypot is sitting in the middle of a device that you actually care about, or even a network you actually care about, it is no longer necessarily a honeypot. It might be kind of a honey grenade. It is really good most of the time, and every once in a while it explodes and ruins your entire network. So be very careful in setting things up. Try and take the right precautions. There's not necessarily a centralized repository for like how to do it. But for example, if you set up a honeypot, I'm the attacker, and I get into your network, but I go into your honeypot by default. I notice everything is a little bit too easy, or maybe I just realize that I'm on a network that only has one node, and I think that's very strange. Then I might say, it's very possible I've been trapped, but they don't realize that I realize that I have been trapped. So I can play on that sort of assumption and start trashing their system, which is what they would expect. I can do all sorts of behaviors that you might also expect. And then the second that there is some sort of vulnerability that I have noticed, or the second that I realize I can go one step back in the network but not all the way out of your network, then I will use that point to then branch back into it. And I will make sure to not hit the honeypot again. And so that sort of thing, it then buys me time, right? So if your honeypot's not configured correctly, or if it's configured in a way that you forget that your router is a potential attack surface, or that a firewall can be a potential attack surface. There are all sorts of attack surfaces, and you want to minimize those. But there are reasons for having them. There's a reason for a firewall, and there's certainly a reason for a router. So you have to be careful, and there's a lot of balancing that goes on there.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see the cybersecurity stream.
It'll be very fun.
Kali stream.
I'm very excited for it.
I saw an Ars Technica article on outages on Microsoft Azure. Do you have thoughts on going to cloud versus having your own server? The main motivation to me is the cybersecurity staying up to date constantly there on the Azure, I'm guessing they're talking.
Right. So it is actually definitely a good point to end on, since we've been talking about web servers. I'm going to kill mine while I answer that question. But basically the question being that if you host something on some sort of remote provider like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they have a lot more resources than me, the individual. I know that's true. I have $5 in my wallet, and they do not have just $5 in theirs. So they are capable of doing all sorts of things to update and maintain security practices. They can update the hardware itself, which is really important. They can do all sorts of really, really cool things that I can't. And as my own personal user, if I'm hosting a server in my house, it costs me electricity costs, which they are not really necessarily charging directly to me, at least not in the same way. It also might cost me in like networking from my ISP. It might cost me in terms of what if a hardware device breaks, if I have a hard drive that just breaks, like they break from time to time, that would be really bad. I don't necessarily have data backing up and things like that. There are a lot of really really great advantages to using a cloud service provider. Now, that being said, that cloud service provider has hardware access to your device. So they could, in concept, if they were to ever turn to be a bad agent, they could mess with your device, and that is something to be kind of paranoidly aware of. Something else to kind of keep in mind is having a service on your own, like provisioning for it in your own in-house or in warehouse, then you have to take care of every single part of it, and there are a lot of security concerns that you might not be aware of, whereas Amazon has their own security team dedicated to doing just that. So it's generally worthwhile if you're like a business or enterprise solution, unless you're big enough that it is more cost effective to keep it in-house. It's usually going to be more worthwhile to keep it on some sort of service. Now, examples where that might not be true, despite cost effectiveness, would be maybe hospitals, where data and sensitivity are really important, of utmost security, confidential. And I think AWS actually does follow enough safety parameters on that they are regulation approved as far as like hospital documents go. If you're a law firm, that might be of utmost priority to you. And it's a selling point even to your clients, is that we protect your data because we own all of it, from the electricity that comes into the house to all of the data that you gave to us. If you are a government, for example, if I am the foreign government of China, if I'm the Chinese Communist Party, I might not use AWS to host my things because the US government, it is an American company, and the US government might subpoena things off of that hardware, and they might be totally within their rights to do that if it is a matter of national security. So that would be something to consider. But I don't think any governments are really watching, or if they are, hello. And that's all I have to say for that.
All 41.
Yeah, all 41 of them are foreign governments.
But we don't have any web-facing stuff. So the setup where I work is house server, in-house server, and backup on Azure just to keep everyone running. But we don't have any web-facing stuff like a website or databases or anything big. Just DNS, DHCP, and AD.
Sure. And so your AD is basically tells us that you're using some sort of Windows environment, which is really cool, likely using some form of Windows Server if you have it all in-house. And if you have just DNS, DHCP, and AD, then minimal services definitely helps. And continuing along the kind of paranoid track of this conversation, if I wanted to be extremely paranoid, well, you can poison DNS, you can mess with DHCP, and I could actually override the security of your AD using any number of man-in-the-middle versus external attacks versus whatever. But generally speaking, that sounds like a good practice. That seems very reasonable, and within business, that seems like a pretty standard practice. So, there's all sorts of ways of doing that sort of thing, and I don't think that there's any realistic threat. But it is something to keep in mind, right? As a computer scientist, as a cybersecurity person, as a programmer, and as a person, it is definitely a good idea to be as thorough as possible and have kind of these cases enumerated, so that in the event that that happens, even if it is a very unlikely probability or a very low probability occurrence, you're still aware that it could have happened and you might have some provision in case. I believe a good example of that is the United States occasionally discusses what happens if the zombies come and take over in the Senate. Like, that's a real discussion that occurs. And it's such a low probability as to most people saying that would never happen. But it is very possible, it's been considered in popular culture enough that maybe something along those lines could happen, and considering that case, still worthwhile.
Makes sense to me. It looks like President Mars asked about the Humble Bundle currently running a sale on some cybersecurity books. So these are them if you want to look. He's basically asking, are any of these worthwhile? So these are the first row.
Right. So things with books, and the reason that I'm somewhat wary of, though definitely a huge fan of getting books on cybersecurity, blockchain, C, programming, best practices, worst practices, mediocre practices. No one ever writes a book, mediocre practices of C programming. They always write the best practices, and who knows where that came from. But the reason that I'm wary of books and of buying information on like a monolithic standpoint is I am usually of the opinion that people have some really good opinions and some really bad opinions, and myself included, right? I've probably said something within the past 3 streams that someone was like, that's either wrong, that's probably happened many times maybe, or that's a terrible opinion, here's why, and they had real evidence for it. Yeah, PHP is probably a great example. I was like, I hate PHP, and they're like, well, I have real evidence backed up by metrics and standards that says you're wrong. Sure. And that's the reason that I advocate pulling as much information as you can, because as you start to make your own opinions on these sorts of things, you are capable of actually looking at a book and reading, one of these books is Mastering Kali Linux for Advanced Penetration Testing. Okay, well, that's a lot of words that sound really cool, and I'm not going to just criticize the book based on word mincing, but they're not necessarily meaningful. What do you mean to master something? At what level are you a master of anything? And if you're talking about advanced penetration testing, well, what differentiates that from intermediate penetration testing? How did you define penetration testing? Is that the standard? Is that what the community and the world has decided on? Is that a community within the United States? Is that a government has decided on that? There's a lot of decisions that are implicit in just the title, and I might still read that. I think that sounds like a great book. That sounds cool. I might learn some tricks that I never knew before. But I would also want to read another book that claims it's better at it, because now I have some countering opinions. I can make my own choices and decisions there. A lot of programming, a lot of cybersecurity, a lot of life is actually just making choices and weighing trade-offs and benefits. And that's generally what I would use as an approach for learning things about CS.
Absorb more data.
Yeah.
More information.
Pull in more and more information as much as you can, and try not to overwhelm yourself.
They said they're going to call you Nick the Spy from now on.
That, sure.
Intelligence agencies don't need spies since all their data is already in the cloud.
Well, their spies have just gotten upgraded. All our data is already in the cloud. There's all sorts of interesting things on that statement where I think the FBI would like you to believe that that is not true. They follow the law. They go through courts, and at least in the United States, they are fully above board. I think the CIA and NSA would like to agree with what you just said. So there's all sorts of very interesting things. There's all sorts of interesting political things on that. As far as calling me Nick the Spy, just don't tell the government. And someone also pointed out there, and it'll be probably one of the last comments that we read off, is a cybersecurity programmer told me they try to avoid ever even nesting one loop in code. He says the lack of cyclicity or something like that enables him to test more efficiently. Thoughts? So my first intuition on that is to say that that sounds absurd, but it might have been very reasonable given their context. I don't know exactly what they were saying, and I don't know what they were exactly talking about, but generally the statement of this thing should never be done is missing the nuance to make it correct. And so saying never nest one loop in code, no loops.
Done.
Okay. Sure. I write everything with if statements. That's not a loop. And I can't have a for loop, no while loops. So all of my loops are built through recursion. OK, sure.
Or go-to statements.
Go-to statements. Oh, no. Or go-to statements. So I use go-to and recursion.
Assembly.
Yeah, it's the assembly version of it. So we end up just doing that. And now I've avoided loops. I've not helped my testing at all because now all of my unit tests that rely on using for loops and while loops are useless. And so now I have to rebuild all those. I would argue that, I mean, I'm kind of openly mocking it, but I would say that it sounds like a non-useful statement. It sounds like you're the programmer that told you that either didn't know what they were talking about or it was in a very particular scenario, a very particular instance, and they were right in what they were saying, but in the general sense, that's not a hugely
Maybe it was
useful
like for
statement.
a set of test cases or something, and
right.
They'll run these test cases fast,
right.
so no loop. Have you ever seen a dumb spy on TV?
Oh,
I've seen.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is Mr. Bean a spy? Like
yeah, Johnny English. Yeah. Those are like the trope. That's like that's where the joke comes from.
Right,
like
exactly.
That's like the whole point of it.
That's why they're funny. There's a good comment on like exploiting code is more about sanitation and things like putting too much into an allocated amount of space to break things. Sure, that is a very good example of a classic buffer overflow where I know that you wanted a certain amount of data somewhere, and actually that takes advantage of two things a buffer overflow does, but it does have half of what you're talking about, which is, and I just give it way too much stuff. And so the things at the end, nobody knows what they do. They might be a pointer somewhere. They might overload your return address and then return you to another piece of code that I loaded, things like that. And that also relies on the fact that code is just data. And data represented at any level could be anything. It could be an image, it could be a word, it could be code, it could be executable, it could be your mother's maiden name. Like, no one really knows what it is. And so you have to be able to deal with or force data to be a certain kind, or you should try to. And generally, I'm of the minimalist approach. Make everything as small and minimal as possible, only what is needed, like needed, and then build from there.
No loops.
Yes, no loops. I don't advocate for that, just as an FYI. I use loops, they're useful, they have a purpose.
For loops,
yeah.
while loops.
I use all of them. It's like the weirdest, the programmer's version of dabbling.
And they said, why is Nick so smart? It'd be funny, back to our joke about there's no actual chat. We're just
in our heads. I appreciate it. I think there's just a lot to learn. Always lots and lots to learn.
That's clear to me.
Yeah.
I'm very excited for the hacking stuff.
Yeah.
That's stuff that I've never dived into.
Nice, there we go. Okay.
I want to say dove in for some reason, which is not a word, I don't think.
But it sounds right. Like, it sounds like the thing you would say in English. Who knows?
I've never dived into that, so that'd be cool.
Yeah, there we go.
I think a lot of people would like that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that'd be awesome.
Let's go to your screensaver as the.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to end. Oh yeah, that closed because I killed it.
There we go.
There we go.
So of those, to bring it back to the color stuff, so which of those colors can you differentiate?
So I generally, looking at that, I see red, I see orange, and I see blue. I see a lighter version of blue from time to time, and like lighter versions of those three colors, but I don't really see anything in between. So I would imagine there's also purple and pink, because I know lolcat generates those colors. I would also imagine that there is some sort of green. I don't notice it in here, though.
There is there is a bit of green, yeah.
OK, so that would be a color that I don't end up actually seeing. And I believe I see white, I think. There are some colors that get light enough that I think they become kind of white.
I think they're just cyan.
Yeah, they might just be a really light blue. And so I don't necessarily know which colors I'm missing, but based on my guesses, those are the ones that would exist that I don't see. Well, green is a good example.
Have you had that your whole life, or is that a development in your vision?
Yeah, that's actually been there ever since I can remember. Well, I guess in first grade was notified about that. And then that's actually the first and only test I tried to cheat on. It was a good lesson in why not to cheat. It's just like an FYI. I tried to cheat on this test. Basically the way it worked at our school was we were a very small school. They handed out a bunch of cards. They asked you to write down what you see in the cards. And I was like, got it, I can do that. And then I looked in the cards and there's nothing there because I'm colorblind, so duh. And so I looked over at the kid next to me and I was like, all right, sailboat, 7, square. Done, got it, and just like tried to look through the rest of the cards, saw nothing. And so then they came out to me, and I thought they'd caught me. I thought they'd noticed me cheating. So I was like, oh man, in like first grade, you're what, 8 or so? My small brain was kind of just like, oh crap, I've gotten caught cheating. And the teacher was like, yeah, so you're colorblind. And I was like, well, that's offensive. Like that's kind of a harsh punishment for cheating. And,
yeah, they made you colorblind.
Yeah, I was like, Jesus, what the? And then they were like, well, so none of those answers were remotely correct. Because there were shapes and numbers and things. All of mine were letters. So I didn't write a single letter down. I wrote a number, I wrote a shape, and another shape.
Well-designed test, too.
Very well-designed test. Very easy test. Like simple and just beautifully well done. And I was like, dang it. Like that, couldn't have gotten around that one. And yeah, I couldn't cheat after that because I was just so traumatized by that. I also then learned I was colorblind, which was cool. Cool. It was an interesting development. I was kind of like, oh, nifty. Because it doesn't really bother you that much.
Yeah, I can imagine it's probably not something that impacts you too much. No. Like this can here, do the red and green look similar to you?
I actually didn't know there was red on there.
The words, Canada Dry, that's red. What does it look like? Does it look the same as the green?
Yeah, it's just the same as this. Yeah.
Crazy.
Oh, that's kind of cool. Wow. Is there any more red on there?
For anybody who doesn't know.
Yeah, sorry, I had like a soda.
The green screen.
Oh, that's really funny.
Okay, never mind. We have a green can with red letters on it. You guys are never going to see.
Oh, well, actually, I guess the letters are red, right? So they would still show up on the green screen.
They will. So
so what you guys can see and what I can see now on the screen must be red. Huh.
So that's really funny. This background is a yellow.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can tell, that is yellow.
I know it's like, well, it looks greenish to me, but okay, I can believe it.
That's interesting. So anything that's red tinged is going to look same as green for you.
It tends to. There are moments where I can distinguish, like that book, Colton has a book on his screen right now that is, I think, red or pink, and that one looks pretty clearly red and pink to me.
It's a very light red,
yeah. But like if they're like kind of that same hue, they seem to blend pretty easily.
Okay, so you can differentiate some shades of red.
Yes, yeah. There are definitely some that I can pretty clearly get. There's a lot that I can actually really get by just logic. Like if I think about it for a second before I speak, then I know it's red. Like I know what you're wearing right now is red, but that's because I got one last year.
But this looks
sometimes like corner of my eye looks pretty green. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. That'd be so interesting to sort of see that. I wonder if do they make glasses that do that?
Well,
I think they do, right?
I think so. Yeah. I think you can actually like go online and see like what it would look like for a colorblind person versus a non-colorblind person. But it's weird to me because they don't look the same, right? Like they don't look like how I see it. But I'd imagine for someone who sees all the colors, they do actually get pretty close.
That's such an interesting TIL. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah. Cool. You're actually probably colorblind a little bit too.
But, might be. Yeah. My grandpa had. A little bit of red-green colorblind, but not much. My dad is not colorblind. I don't know how to testify him, but every test
it's pretty hard to notice.
Yeah, every test I've taken test for that though, I've always been able to clearly see what they're testing for.
Okay, so you might actually not be.
Might be. It'd be such a crazy thing to learn.
Crud,
after
TIL.
27 years of existing and not knowing that, but who knows?
Yeah, maybe. Exactly.
I would love to find out if that's true.
Yeah.
Let's bring it. Oh, actually, we're on this screen. This is a good place to sort of segue out. I guess, but maybe we'll bring it to the number 2 shot. Just gets a little
I think that's a nice shot. We get close.
It was an awesome stream, so thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you again for having me.
Like it always goes into sort of the hacking direction. So we got hacked live.
We seem to be, we've been hacked live, which is very cool. I appreciate that.
YouTube title, Nick gets hacked live on YouTube or on Twitch.
That would ruin my job here.
And we got the invisible can of Canada Dry.
Yes.
Very, very important.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that it was on screen. It was probably been on screen for most of the. Oh, I guess it was right off.
It was over there. Yeah, it was a little bit off.
Yeah, but if we turn it like this, it's pretty hard to see.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun. Thank you guys for again participating. I love the live stream. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
Yeah, awesome.
The chat too, just like all the directions we get to go. Yeah, so next week you'll be doing C.
Yes, we're talking about
so you want
low
stuff,
C.
But like more of a deep dive into like actually
we'll hop into
it,
C.
Like almost like pretty much assembly at that point.
Yeah, we'll be pretty much one step above, right? Like just barely, but we'll actually probably bring up some assembly and talk through it.
Doing some GDB and like
we'll GDB a couple of things.
Would be pretty cool actually.
Do some S traces as well.
Like how we can talk about how that loop and goto are similar.
Yes.
That'd be pretty cool actually. And I happen to know a little bit of assembly, which is why we're talking about this.
That's sweet.
Not as much as you.
We might even build a buffer overflow example. That
would be cool.
Actually, I think would be cool.
Yeah.
I know how to do it off the top of our heads, so we can do it. Yeah.
You more than I do. Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you everybody who came today. So
again,
thank you guys. Next week, Nick will be here next Tuesday, same time.
Yep, same time, same place.
And then after the winter break, we have a bunch of stuff.
Oh yeah, we'll have a whole docket of
them. Toss us ideas on either YouTube or here or Facebook. Tomorrow we have Andy Chen who's going to be talking about, somebody who's new to the stream, who's never streamed with us before. He'll be talking about R, we'll be talking about biostats.
Nice.
He'll be using a real world data set for us to look at and to do some stuff with. And I've actually never used R before, so this will be a fun thing for me. Getting all this information about all this stuff that I don't even know.
Colton's learning all sorts of things.
Yeah. This is all just about me, just learning new stuff. Thank you everybody who came today. I'm just making sure I didn't miss any comments here. It looks like everybody's talking about Canada Dry. And do you still hate PHP? Is what they're asking?
I do still hate PHP. That I think will be forever. I'll probably build something in Laravel over the winter break just to like learn it, but like I don't like it.
Just to embrace.
Just to embrace the things that I hate.
Thank you to Mr. Dr. Carbon for the follow. That's an awesome
thank you guys.
too, by the way.
Nice job.
But yeah, this was CS50 on Twitch. I'm Colton Ogden. This was Nick Wong. This was AWS Web Server. And we talked about using it with WordPress. Tune in tomorrow for R and biostats. But until then, have a great rest of your evening. And Nick will see you next week.
Yep.
I will see you all.
Well, he'll see you tomorrow.
I'll see you next week, but I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good rest of your night. Goodbye.
Awesome. See you guys.